They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I served mine scorching hot, in the bed of the most powerful man my cheating mate ever feared. My name is Rosalie Forgathy, and I was nobody. The illegitimate daughter my father's legitimate family tolerated out of obligation. The unclaimed Omega Alpha King Bolden card, kept around for appearances while he bedded my stepsister in hotel rooms I was too naive to suspect existed. I was invisible. Expendable. The kind of woman alphas cheated on because they knew I'd never have the courage to leave, never have the audacity to fight back, never have the sheer reckless fury to walk into the one place that would destroy everything Bolden had built. His father's estate. Stephen Card's private sanctuary where retired alpha kings went to contemplate their legacies, away from pack politics and succession drama and sons who couldn't wait for them to vacate power completely. I walked in there with one goal: hurt Bolden the way he'd hurt me, make him feel the humiliation I'd felt finding him with my stepsister Vivian, prove that even invisible women could become unforgettable when pushed past every limit. What I didn't expect was Stephen himself. Bolden's father, the legend who'd ruled the Western Territories for 40 years before retiring 5 years ago, the man whose reputation made current Alpha Kings look like children playing at power. He was supposed to be old, diminished, irrelevant. He was none of those things. Rosalie Forgathy, he'd said when I appeared in his study like an avenging angel powered by rage and heartbreak. The invisible Omega. The illegitimate daughter. The woman my son thinks is too worthless to mark as his mate. What brings you to my doorstep, looking like you're ready to burn the world down just to watch it light his face with the flames? I want revenge, I'd said, my voice shaking with fury I'd been suppressing for years. I want to hurt him the way he hurt me. I want him to feel what it's like being disposable. And you're the only person he actually fears. The only authority he still answers to despite ruling the Western Territories. So, I'm here to proposition you. Use me to hurt him. Mark me, claim me, make him understand what he threw away. Make him suffer. Stephen had studied me with eyes that had seen 40 years of pack politics, betrayals, power plays, and desperate Omegas offering themselves for revenge they couldn't achieve alone. Then he'd smiled, slow, dangerous smile that made me understand exactly why Alpha Kings still fear him despite his retirement. You're asking me to claim you, he'd said, making the subtext explicit. To publicly mark you as mine, to humiliate my son by taking his rejected Omega and making her untouchable to everyone except me. That's a bold proposition from an invisible woman who's never demanded anything in her life. What makes you think you can handle the consequences of what you're asking for? I don't care about the consequences. I care about making him hurt the way I'm hurting. If that means becoming yours instead of his, if it means being claimed by a retired Alpha King who terrifies his own son, then that's the price I'm willing to pay for revenge. Revenge isn't free, Rosalie. It costs everything you think you're willing to give, and then demands more. It strips away the person you were and leaves someone you might not recognize in the mirror. Are you prepared for that transformation? For becoming the Omega who destroyed an Alpha King by accepting his father's claim? For being known as that woman for the rest of your life in pack society? I'm already known as the illegitimate daughter who wasn't worth marking. Being known as the Omega who brought down an Alpha King through his own father seems like an upgrade, honestly. At least that woman has power. At least she's not invisible. Then let's make you unforgettable. Stephen had stood from his desk, moved toward me with predatory grace that reminded me he wasn't retired because he was weak. He was retired because 40 years of ruling had exhausted his patience for pack politics, not his capability to dominate when motivated. But understand this. Once I claim you, once my mark is on your skin and my scent is in your wolf's recognition, there's no going back. You won't be invisible anymore. You'll be mine. And I don't share, I don't release, and I don't tolerate anyone, including my son, attempting to reclaim what I've taken. Are those terms you can accept? I should have been terrified. Should have recognized that I was trading one form of possession for another, that Stephen's claim would be even more absolute than anything Bolden had ever attempted. Should have understood that revenge through becoming claimed by your mate's father was the kind of choice that destroyed futures and created legends for all the wrong reasons. But I was tired. Tired of being invisible, being disposable, being the Omega everyone assumed would just accept mistreatment because I'd never learned to fight back. Tired of watching my stepsister take everything, my father's attention, my family's respect, and now my mate, while I remained the unwanted, illegitimate daughter grateful for scraps of affection. "I accept your terms," I'd said, my voice steady despite terror warring with fury in my chest. "Claim me, mark me, make me yours in ways that will destroy Bolden when he learns what I've done. That's what I want, his destruction through the one act he'd never forgive. Taking his father's claim when I was supposed to be satisfied with his scraps. Then welcome to the beginning of your transformation, Rosalie Forgathy. By the time we're done, by the time everyone knows you're mine, you won't be the invisible, illegitimate daughter anymore. You'll be the Omega who brought an Alpha King to his knees by becoming something he can never reclaim, never control, never dismiss as worthless again. That's the revenge I'm offering. The question is whether you're strong enough to survive what it costs to achieve it." I wasn't strong enough. Not yet. But I was angry enough, hurt enough, reckless enough to believe I could become strong enough if it meant making Bolden suffer the way he'd made me suffer. That belief, that desperate, furious belief that revenge would fix the brokenness inside me, was about to teach me exactly how wrong I could be about everything. About revenge. About power. About the difference between being claimed and being valued. About Stephen Card, who was nothing like the retired, diminished legend I'd expected, and everything like the nightmare Bolden still feared in his most honest moments. This is the story of how I stopped being invisible by becoming unforgettable. How I destroyed an Alpha King by letting his father claim me. And how revenge transformed into something far more complicated than the simple hurt-for-hurt exchange I'd imagined when I walked into Stephen's estate carrying betrayal like a weapon I didn't know how to wield safely. This is the story of how I learned that power isn't the same as agency, that being seen isn't the same as being valued, and that sometimes the most dangerous prisons are the ones we walk into willingly because we're too desperate for validation to recognize the bars until they've already closed behind us. This is my story, and it begins with betrayal in a hotel room and ends with truths I never wanted to learn about my mother, my family, and exactly why being invisible had been the only thing keeping me alive. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually began, with walking in on Bolden and Vivian, with the shattering of every illusion I'd been clinging to about my worth, and with the decision that would change everything. The decision to stop being invisible by becoming Stephen Card's claimed mate. The decision that would either save me or destroy me completely, depending on whether revenge was worth the price of my soul. Rosalie just walked in on Alpha King Bolden cheating with her stepsister Vivian. And instead of crying and accepting it like everyone expected, she walked straight to his father's estate and offered herself for revenge. Stephen Card, the legendary retired Alpha King who ruled for 40 years. What happens when you let your cheating mate's powerful father claim you just to destroy your ex? Can Rosalie handle the consequences of being marked by the one man Bolden actually fears? And what dark secrets is Stephen hiding about why he agreed so quickly to claim his son's rejected Omega? Hit subscribe because this story reveals exactly what happens when a retired Alpha King decides to teach his arrogant son a lesson using the Omega he threw away. Also, revenge through letting your ex's dad claim you. Therapeutic or just really complicated family dynamics. The hotel room had been elegant, one of those luxury suites that costs more per night than I made in a month as a university student barely scraping by on minimal family support. Bolden had sent word through packed channels for me to meet him there, said he had a surprise for me, said we needed to discuss something important about our relationship. I'd thought, foolishly, desperately, that maybe he was finally going to mark me. That after 2 years of being his unclaimed Omega, while he ruled the Western Territories, Maybe he was ready to make me his queen instead of just the invisible companion who attended pack functions alone while he networked with important alphas. Instead, I'd walked in using the key card the hotel had given me at his instruction to find him with Vivian, my stepsister. The legitimate daughter, the one my father's wife had produced within proper mate bonds, the woman who'd spent 23 years making sure I understood I was lesser, unwanted, tolerated only because my father felt obligated to acknowledge his affair-born daughter. They hadn't even had the decency to stop when I'd opened the door. Vivian had looked over Bolden's shoulder, her expression mixing triumph and contempt in equal measure, and smiled at me like she'd won some competition I hadn't known we were having. "Oh, Rosalie," she'd said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Bolden and we've been seeing each other for months. We were going to tell you gently, but since you're here, he's chosen me, the legitimate daughter, the one who actually deserves to be Alpha Queen. You understand, don't you? You've always understood your place." Bolden had at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, though whether from being caught or from Vivian's cruelty, I couldn't determine. "Rosalie," I was going to explain. "Explain what?" "That you've been betting my stepsister, while I played the loyal, unclaimed Omega waiting for a mark that was never coming? That every time you said you were handling pack business, you were actually with her? That I was so worthless to you that you couldn't even bother ending whatever we had before starting something new?" My voice had been shaking, tears streaming down my face despite my attempts to maintain some dignity. "What exactly were you going to explain that makes this acceptable?" "That you were never going to be queen material," Vivian had answered for him, sitting up without bothering to cover herself. "You're illegitimate, Rosalie. Your mother was a nobody. Your father got pregnant during a business trip. You have no pack standing, no political connections, no value except as the charity case my father felt obligated to acknowledge. Bolden needs a queen who brings something to the throne. I bring my father's business empire, political connections, legitimate bloodline. What do you bring? Awkwardness and bastard status." "Vivian, that's enough," Bolden had said, finally moving away from her.
"Rosalie, I'm sorry."
"You're a good person. But she's right about the political realities. An alpha king can't afford to choose a mate based on personal feelings when the throne requires strategic alliances. I need Vivian's connections. I need her family support. You need to feel powerful by making me feel worthless," I'd interrupted, my tears stopping as rage replaced heartbreak. "That's what this is really about. Not politics. Not strategic alliances. Just you needing to feel superior by showing me I was never good enough, never worthy, never anything except temporary entertainment until someone better came along. And Vivian gets to feel superior by taking what was mine, by proving once again that the legitimate daughter wins and the bastard loses. That's what this is. Cruelty disguised as political necessity. Believe whatever makes you feel better about being inadequate," Vivian had said with a smile that made me want to shift and tear her throat out despite knowing my Omega Wolf was no match for her stronger bloodline. "The truth is, you were placeholder. Someone to keep Bolden company while he waited for appropriate mate to manifest. That's all you ever were. Temporary. Forgettable. The kind of Omega Alpha Kings use and discard without second thought because they're too weak to demand better treatment. I'd left then. Fled, really, unable to maintain composure anymore, unable to keep pretending their words weren't destroying every illusion I'd built about my worth, my place, my future. I'd stumbled out of that hotel feeling like my skin was too tight, like my wolf was screaming inside my chest, like everything I'd believed about Bolden and our relationship had been. Lie I'd told myself because accepting the truth was too painful. The drive to Stephen's estate had been instinctive. I'd been there once before, months ago, when Bolden had brought me to introduce me to his father. Stephen had looked at me with those knowing eyes and said something I hadn't understood at the time. "You're too good for this, little Omega. My son doesn't deserve the loyalty you're giving him. When he inevitably fails you, remember that you have choices. Even invisible women have the power to choose revenge over acceptance." I'd thought it was strange advice from a father about his son. Now I understood. Stephen had seen what Bolden was doing, had recognized the pattern, had known his son would eventually discard me the same way he discarded every other Omega who wasn't politically valuable enough to mark. The estate guards recognized me from my previous visit, let me through despite the late hour, despite my obvious emotional distress, despite the fact that I had no appointment or legitimate reason to visit a retired Alpha King in the middle of the night. Stephen's study was exactly as I remembered. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, massive desk that spoke of decades of power consolidated through intelligence rather than just brute force. And Stephen himself, looking up from whatever documents he'd been reviewing with an expression that suggested he'd been expecting me. "Rosalie Forgathy," he'd said, closing the file he'd been reading. "I wondered how long it would take for you to find your way here after my son's latest betrayal. Did you catch him with your stepsister, then?" That's his usual pattern. Choose the woman who'll hurt his current Omega most completely, make the rejection personal rather than just political. It's cruel in ways I didn't teach him, cruelty he learned from his mother before she died. "You knew," I'd said, my rage finding a new target. "You knew he was cheating and you didn't warn me properly. You just gave cryptic advice about having choices and left me to figure out the truth on my own."
Why?
Why let me suffer through discovery when you could have just told me what he was doing? Because being told doesn't create the fury necessary for transformation. Being told makes you a victim seeking protection. Discovering it yourself, discovering it in the most humiliating way possible, that creates the rage required to actually fight back rather than just accepting mistreatment and moving on. I didn't warn you properly because I needed you angry, not just hurt. Angry Omegas are useful. Hurt Omegas are just sad. I prefer useful to sad. So, you manipulated me, waited for the inevitable betrayal, knew I'd come here seeking revenge once I was angry enough, positioned yourself as the solution to problem you let happen. That's calculating in ways that make Bolden's cruelty look amateur. I'm 40 years of Alpha King experience applied to personal relationships instead of just pack politics. Yes, I'm calculating. Yes, I manipulated circumstances to ensure you'd come here with the fury necessary to accept what I'm offering. But Rosalie, he'd stood then, moved around the desk with that predatory grace that made my Omega instincts scream both danger and desire simultaneously. I'm not offering you false comfort or gentle rejection. I'm offering you actual revenge. The kind that will destroy my son's reputation, his political standing, his sense of superiority. The kind that requires you to accept my claim and everything that comes with being marked by retired Alpha King, who still terrifies current rulers. Is that what you want? Actualmente? Or do you want me to pat your head and tell you everything will be fine while you go home and cry into your pillow about the Alpha who didn't value you? I want revenge, I'd said, the words coming out fierce despite my fear. I want him to hurt. I want him to regret ever treating me like I was disposable. I want him to understand that discarding me was the worst mistake he ever made. And you're right, you're the only person who can make him feel that. You're the only authority he fears, the only power he respects. So yes, I'm asking you to claim me, to mark me, to make me yours in ways that will destroy him when he finds out. That's what I want. Revenge that actually matters. Then come here, Stephen had said, his alpha command gentle but absolute. Come here and accept what I'm offering. But understand, once I mark you, once you're mine, there's no going back to who you were. No returning to invisible Omega who accepted scraps because she didn't know she could demand more. You'll be mine.
Permanently. Publicly.
With all the protection and all the possession that entails.
Can you accept that?
Can you trade invisible suffering for visible claiming by Alpha King who doesn't do temporary, doesn't do casual, and doesn't tolerate anyone attempting to take what's his? I'd crossed the space between us before conscious thought could stop me, before fear could overwhelm fury, before self-preservation could remind me that accepting an alpha's claim was forever in ways that normal relationships weren't. I accept, I'd said, tilting my head to expose my neck in submission, which was also a challenge. I accept your claim, your mark, your possession. Make me yours. Make me unforgettable. Make me the weapon that destroys your son's arrogance. That's what I'm choosing. That's the revenge I want. Stephen's eyes had flashed with approval and hunger mixed together. Then he'd pulled me close, one hand tangling in my hair while the other pressed against the small of my back, and he'd bitten down on the claiming spot where neck met shoulder, not the gentle marking of affection but the possessive claim of an alpha who meant every word he'd said about ownership and permanence. The pain had been intense, fire spreading from the bite through my entire nervous system, my Omega Wolf recognizing the claim and submitting despite never having submitted to Bolden in 2 years of waiting for a mark that never came. This was different. This was absolute. This was the kind of claim that rewrote your biology, changed your scent, marked you as taken in ways every wolf within 100 miles would recognize instantly. When Stephen finally pulled back, when I could think through the haze of pain and unexpected pleasure, I realized what I'd actually done, what I'd accepted, what I'd chosen in moment of rage-fueled desperation. I'd been claimed by Bolden's father, by the retired Alpha King who'd ruled the Western Territories for 40 years, by the one man whose claim Bolden would never forgive, never overcome, never find a political solution for. There, Stephen had said, his voice carrying satisfaction that made me shiver. Now you're mine. Now you're unforgettable. Now you're the Omega who destroyed an Alpha King by accepting his father's claim. How does revenge feel, Rosalie? Does it taste as sweet as you imagined? Or does it taste like a consequence you're only just beginning to understand? It tastes like burning, I'd said honestly, my neck still on fire from the mark. Like something that can't be undone, can't be taken back, can't be fixed if I regret it later. That's what revenge tastes like.
Permanent. Good.
You understand the cost. That's more than most Omegas understand when they seek revenge through claiming politics. You'll survive this. You'll thrive, possibly, if you're as strong as I think you are beneath the invisible act you've been performing. But Rosalie, his expression had been serious despite the satisfaction. My son is going to retaliate. Violently, probably. Publicly, certainly. He's not going to accept this gracefully. He's going to fight, going to try to reclaim you through pack law or political pressure or outright force. And I'm going to have to defend my claim through methods you might not approve of.
Can you handle that?
Can you handle being the center of conflict between Alpha King and his father? Because that's what you just signed up for by accepting my mark. I can handle it, I'd said with more confidence than I felt. I can handle Bolden's retaliation, your defense of the claim, being visible instead of invisible. I can handle whatever consequences come from this choice. Because anything is better than going back to being the Omega he discarded, the invisible daughter no one valued, the woman everyone assumed would just accept mistreatment because she didn't know how to fight back. Then let's see how well you handle the storm that's coming. Because by tomorrow morning, by the time I ensure everyone in Pack Society knows you're mine, the storm is going to be catastrophic. For you, for Bolden, for everyone caught between retired Alpha King's claim and current Alpha King's fury. Welcome to visibility, Rosalie. Welcome to being unforgettable. Welcome to the revenge that's going to teach you exactly why invisible Omegas stay invisible, because being seen by powerful alphas is the most dangerous place you can possibly exist. He was right, of course.
About the storm.
About the danger. About everything I was about to learn the hard way. But in that moment, with his mark burning on my neck, with his scent replacing Bolden's in my wolf's recognition, with his claim making me his in ways I couldn't undo even if I wanted to, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful.
Seen.
Worth something beyond just being tolerated. It was intoxicating. Addictive. The kind of feeling that made you understand why Omegas accepted dangerous claims from powerful alphas despite knowing the cost. Because being valued, even possessively, even dangerously, felt better than being invisible. At least until the consequences caught up with me. Then I'd learn exactly what Stephen meant about the cost of revenge. About the difference between being claimed and being valued. About what it meant to be owned by Alpha King who didn't share, didn't release, and didn't tolerate anyone challenging his possession. I'd learn all of it. The hard way. Because that's how revenge always teaches its lessons, through pain you chose voluntarily and regretted permanently. I woke in Stephen's bed, not his study where he'd claimed me, but his actual private chambers, luxurious room that spoke of wealth accumulated over 40 years of ruling, comfort preferred by a man who no longer had to prove anything to anyone. Morning light was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and I was alone, the sheets beside me cold enough to suggest Stephen had been up for hours. My neck was still burning where he'd marked me, the claiming bite visible in the mirror across the room. Deep, possessive, the kind of mark that would scar permanently, that would identify me as is to every wolf who saw it for the rest of my life. "You're awake," Stephen said, appearing in the doorway dressed in casual clothes that somehow still projected authority.
Good.
"We have busy day ahead, public appearances, strategic announcements, ensuring everyone in Pack Society knows exactly whose claim you're wearing. That's the revenge component. Making sure Bolden can't pretend this didn't happen, can't dismiss it as rumor, can't politically maneuver around the fact that his father has claimed his former Omega. Ready for that level of visibility?" "I don't know," I answered honestly, pulling the sheet around myself despite knowing he'd already seen everything, already claimed everything, already owned me in ways that made modesty irrelevant. Yesterday, I was invisible. Today I'm going to be the center of the biggest scandal Pack Society has seen in decades. That's an extreme transition that I'm not sure I'm equipped to handle gracefully. You don't have to handle it gracefully. You just have to handle it without backing down, without apologizing, without giving Bolden the satisfaction of seeing you regret the choice. That's the performance required for successful revenge. Conviction despite consequences.
Can you do that?
Can you face Pack Society knowing they're judging you, knowing they think you're an opportunistic Omega who seduced her mate's father for power and status? Because that's the story they're going to tell themselves. Not the truth about betrayal and rage and desperation. Just simple narrative about ambitious Omega who traded up from Alpha King to his more powerful father. "Let them think whatever they want," I said, forcing strength I didn't entirely feel. "Let them judge me, gossip about me, create whatever narratives make them feel superior. I know the truth. I know Bolden betrayed me, that Vivian deliberately hurt me, that I chose revenge over acceptance. Their opinion of my motivations doesn't change reality of what actually happened." Good answer. You're learning faster than I anticipated. Most Omegas in your position would be concerned about reputation, about pack perception, about being liked by people whose approval means nothing. You're already past that, already understanding that power matters more than popularity. That's going to serve you well in the conflicts ahead. Stephen moved into the room properly, sat on the edge of the bed with casual intimacy that made me hyper-aware of our new dynamic. "But Rosalie, before we begin the public performance, before we launch the revenge you asked for, I need you to understand something important. This isn't just about humiliating Bolden anymore. The moment I marked you, the moment my claims settled into your wolf's recognition, this became about defending possession that I actually value. You're not just weapon against my son. You're mine. That distinction matters for how I'm going to approach the coming conflicts. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're saying revenge was the beginning, but possession is the actual dynamic now. That I'm not just temporary ally against Bolden. I'm your claimed mate with all the permanence that entails. That's what you're clarifying. That whatever started as mutually beneficial arrangement for revenge has become actual relationship with actual expectations and actual possessiveness on your part. Exactly. I'm claiming you because it serves my purposes to teach my son a lesson. But I'm keeping you because you're interesting in ways I didn't anticipate. Brave in ways most Omegas aren't. Willing to burn your own life down for revenge, which suggests passion I find compelling. So yes, this is more than just strategic claiming for political purposes. This is actual claiming with actual intent to keep you.
Permanently.
Regardless of whether revenge succeeds or fails.
Can you handle that?
Can you handle being valued by Alpha, who doesn't do temporary, who doesn't release mates he's claimed, who's going to defend you with levels of possessive violence that might terrify you? I should have been frightened. Should have recognized that Stephen's possessiveness was potentially more dangerous than Bolden's betrayal, that being valued by powerful Alpha came with expectations and restrictions I might not be equipped to handle long-term. Should have understood that accepting his claim meant accepting everything about him, the protection and the possession, the safety and the control, the visibility and the targeting that came with being claimed by retired Alpha King who still wielded significant influence. But I was tired of being careful, tired of accepting less than I deserved, tired of invisible safety that was really just acceptable suffering. I can handle it, I said, meeting his eyes directly despite my Omega instinct screaming at me to submit to his dominance. I can handle being valued, being kept, being defended with whatever possessive violence you think is necessary. That's better than being invisible, better than being discarded, better than spending the rest of my life as the Omega who is never worth claiming properly. So yes, I accept what you're offering. The revenge and the relationship. The visibility and the consequences. All of it. Then get dressed. We have appearance to make at the Western Territories Council chambers. Bolden called emergency meeting this morning. Apparently he learned about the claiming through pack channels, is demanding formal hearing about whether my claim is legitimate given our age difference and his prior relationship with you. This is his first attempt to reclaim you through pack law. And we're going to destroy that attempt so thoroughly he'll never try using legal maneuvering again. Ready to face him publicly? To see his reaction when he realizes exactly what you've done. I'm ready, I said, though my heart was racing with anticipation and terror mixed together. I'm ready to face him, to see his reaction, to defend my choice to accept your claim instead of remaining his discarded Omega. Let's make this revenge official. Let's make him understand exactly what he lost when he chose Vivian over me. Stephen just marked Rosalie with the most possessive claiming bite pack society has seen in decades. And now Bolden knows. He's called an emergency council meeting to challenge the claim's legitimacy. But what he doesn't know is that Stephen isn't just using Rosalie for revenge. He's actually keeping her permanently. What happens when father and son face off in council chambers with claimed Omega as the prize? Can Rosalie handle the public scrutiny of being Stephen's mate? And what's this about Bolden having a usual pattern of cruel betrayals? How many Omegas has he destroyed before Rosalie? Hit subscribe because the next chapter features the council confrontation and Bolden's epic meltdown when he realizes his father actually values what he threw away. Also, attending your ex's father's council meeting where you're the main topic. Awkward or ultimate power move. The Western Territories council chambers were exactly as imposing as I'd imagined. Massive stone buildings that had witnessed centuries of pack politics, grand hall with vaulted ceilings where Alpha Kings made decisions that affected thousands of wolves, seats arranged in semicircles around the central floor where accused or petitioners stood to face judgment. Today, I was the one standing on that central floor, Stephen beside me with his hand possessively on my lower back, while Bolden sat in the Alpha King's throne glaring at both of us with fury that made the air crackle with suppressed dominance. This is illegitimate, Bolden said, his voice carrying across the chamber to the assembled council members, 12 senior alphas who'd served under Stephen and now advised his son. My father claimed an Omega who was in a relationship with me, who I was considering marking as my queen, who was stolen through manipulation and exploitation of her vulnerable emotional state. That's not legitimate. That's predatory behavior that should be challenged under pack law, regardless of my father's previous authority. I wasn't in a relationship with you, I said before Stephen could respond, my voice steadier than I'd expected despite terror, making my hands shake. I was your unclaimed Omega, who you kept unattached for 2 years while you decided if I was politically valuable enough to mark. That's not a relationship, that's an extended audition where I was performing for acceptance that was never coming. You made that clear yesterday, when I found you with Vivian. So don't stand there claiming I was stolen from you when you'd already discarded me before Stephen ever made his offer. You walked in on one indiscretion and immediately ran to my father for revenge. That's not the behavior of Omega, who is genuinely attached to me. That's opportunistic calculation by a woman who saw a chance to trade up from Alpha King to his more powerful father. You're not victim here, Rosalie. You're ambitious Omega who manipulated situation to your advantage. I manipulated nothing, I shot back, my anger overriding my fear of public confrontation. I found you with my stepsister, Bolden, the woman who spent 23 years making my life miserable, and I realized you chose her specifically to hurt me as much as possible. That's not indiscretion. That's deliberate cruelty, designed to break me. So yes, I sought revenge. Yes, I accepted Stephen's claim. But I didn't manipulate anything. I responded to your betrayal with the only weapon I had available. Your father's willingness to claim what you discarded. If that makes me opportunistic, fine. Better opportunistic than accepting mistreatment quietly like you expected. Several council members were nodding slightly, apparently finding my defense more compelling than Bolden's accusations. But not all of them. Some were looking at me with a kind of judgment that suggested they agreed with Bolden's narrative about ambitious Omegas who seduce their way into powerful positions. The council needs to rule on legitimacy, Bolden insisted, his dominance pressing against Stevens in ways that made the air feel heavy with competing alpha authority. If my father's claim is deemed illegitimate due to manipulation or coercion, Rosalie returns to unclaimed status, and I have opportunity to properly mark her before anyone else can interfere. That's pack law regarding disputed claims. The council decides, not individual alphas acting on personal vendettas against their sons. The council will decide nothing, Stephen said calmly, his dominance expanding to fill the chamber in ways that made even senior alphas drop their eyes in instinctive submission. Because there's nothing to decide. I claimed willing Omega who sought me out, who explicitly asked for my mark, who accepted all terms of claiming before I touched her. That's legitimate by every standard of pack law. What you're actually asking, what you're really demanding, is that the council invalidate my claim because you're embarrassed. Because you don't want to face consequences of discarding Omega who turned out to be valuable enough that your own father wanted her. That's not legal challenge. That's political maneuvering attempting to use council authority to fix your personal failures. You deliberately claimed her to humiliate me. I claimed her because she asked me to. Because she walked into my estate carrying betrayal like an open wound and requested revenge she couldn't achieve alone. I provided that revenge by marking her as mine. If you're humiliated by that sequence of events, that's a consequence of your own choices, not my manipulation. You created the situation by betraying her. I simply capitalized on your failure. Stephen's voice was cold with contempt. And now you're attempting to use council authority to undo consequences you don't like. That's weak alpha behavior, Bolden. That's admitting you can't defend your choices through strength or strategy, so you're hiding behind pack law hoping someone else will fix problems you created. This is about protecting pack stability. This is about your wounded pride. Stephen's interruption was absolute. About you unable to accept that the Omega you discarded is now claimed by someone you can't challenge, can't intimidate, can't force to release her. That's what this is really about. Not pack stability. Not protection of vulnerable Omegas. Just you, unable to handle the fact that your father found value in what you threw away. That's humiliating, certainly. But it's not grounds for invalidating legitimate claim. The council members were exchanging glances now, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation between father and son playing out in front of them, uncertain whether they should intervene or let it resolve through dominance hierarchy that heavily favored Stephen despite his retirement. Council vote, Bolden demanded, his desperation becoming obvious. On whether the claim is legitimate given the circumstances of coercion, age difference, and prior relationship between Rosalie and myself. That's my right as Alpha King to request formal ruling on disputed claims within my territory. Then vote, Stephen said with dangerous calm. Let's see how many council members are willing to invalidate retired Alpha King's claim just to soothe current Alpha King's wounded pride. Let's see who's loyal to pack law versus who's loyal to political convenience. Vote. Determine whether my claim on Rosalie is legitimate or whether you're going to attempt forcing her back to unclaimed status so Bolden can try marking her against her explicit wishes. Choose carefully, because this vote determines whether you serve justice or whether you serve the Alpha who's currently embarrassed by his own failures. The vote was unanimous. All 12 council members ruled the claim legitimate, some reluctantly, some with obvious satisfaction at seeing Bolden's manipulation attempt fail, all of them apparently unwilling to challenge Stephen's authority despite him no longer holding official position. The claim stands, the head council member announced formally. Stephen Card's marking of Rosalie Forgathy is deemed legitimate under pack law. No challenge will be entertained. The matter is closed. Bolden's fury was palpable, his wolf visible in his eyes, his control fracturing in ways that suggested violence was imminent. But he couldn't attack his father in council chambers, couldn't act on the rage, without appearing completely unstable to the very council members he needed for political support. This isn't over, he said, his voice carrying promise of retaliation. You think claiming her protects her from consequences? You're wrong. She's going to learn exactly what happens to Omegas who betray their alphas for revenge. She's going to be protected by me, Stephen interrupted coldly. She's going to live under my roof, surrounded by my security, defended by Alpha King who has 40 years of experience destroying threats to what he values. If you attempt to harm her, if you so much as approach her without explicit permission, I'll demonstrate exactly why retired Alpha Kings are more dangerous than current rulers who think authority comes from throne rather than capability. Are we clear on that boundary, Bolden? Are you understanding what attacking my claimed mate would cost you? Crystal clear, Bolden said through clenched teeth. Congratulations, father. You've claimed an Omega who's going to destroy your reputation by association. Everyone will know she's opportunistic, manipulative, the kind of Omega who seduces her way into power through whatever Alpha is most useful. That's the woman you've bound yourself to permanently. Hope the revenge was worth the cost to your legacy. My legacy is secure regardless of your opinions about my mate's motivations. What's not secure is your political standing after this very public demonstration that you can't even keep an Omega loyal enough to reject your father's advances. That's the story Pack Society is going to remember. Not that Rosalie is opportunistic. That you're such inadequate Alpha that your own father found value in the Omega you discarded. That's humiliating in ways that affect your rule, your alliances, your future Queen's family's willingness to bind themselves to Alpha who can't maintain basic loyalty from unclaimed Omegas. You did this to yourself, Bolden. I just provided the mirror forcing you to see consequences you'd rather ignore. The council session ended with Bolden storming out, several council members following him with concerned expressions, others remaining to offer quiet congratulations to Stephen on his claiming, careful politeness to me that suggested they weren't sure how to address former invisible Omega who'd become retired Alpha Kings claimed made overnight. That went better than anticipated, Stephen said once we were alone in the council chambers. I expected more resistance, more council members willing to challenge the claim's legitimacy just to maintain favorable relationship with current Alpha King. But they ruled with pack law instead of political convenience. That's encouraging. That's terrifying, I corrected. Bolden's threat wasn't empty. He's going to retaliate, probably violently, definitely publicly. And I'm the target because hurting me hurts you. That's how this works, right? He can't challenge you directly without appearing weak, so he'll target me to prove I'm not worth defending, that claiming me was a mistake that damaged your reputation. That's what's coming. Retaliation through making me suffer publicly enough that you regret the claim. He'll try. He'll fail. But yes, you're correct about the strategy. Attacking you is attacking me by proxy. Making you suffer is attempting to prove the claim was a mistake. That's standard political maneuvering when direct confrontation isn't viable. But Rosalie, Stephen pulled me close, his dominance wrapping around me in ways that felt protective rather than threatening. I meant what I said. You're protected. By me. By my resources. By my very sincere willingness to destroy my own son if he harms what's mine. That's not romantic declaration. That's practical reality of what claiming you means. You're mine to defend now. And I defend what's mine with methods that make diplomatic solutions look gentle. I'm starting to understand that. Starting to understand that accepting your claim didn't just give me revenge. It gave me Alpha, who actually values me enough to defend me against threats, including his own son. That's more than I expected. More than I thought I deserved after years of being treated as disposable. You deserved it all along. You just never had Alpha strong enough to recognize your value beneath the invisible act you were performing. Now you do. Now you're claimed by someone who sees exactly what you are: brave, strategic, willing to burn everything down for revenge, interesting in ways that make permanent claiming appealing rather than just politically convenient. That's what you are to me. Not weapon against my son. Not temporary Omega for revenge purposes. Actual mate I intend to keep regardless of how the political conflicts resolve. Before I could respond, before I could process what he was saying about permanent intent versus temporary claiming, Vivian appeared in the council chamber doorway with expression mixing triumph and malice that made my stomach drop. Well, she said, her voice carrying across the empty chamber. The bastard Omega and her desperate bid for relevance. How does it feel, Rosalie? Knowing everyone thinks you're opportunistic whore who seduced your way from Alpha King to his father? Knowing your reputation is destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery? Knowing that even if Stephen keeps you, you'll always be the Omega who betrayed her Alpha for better positioning? That's the legacy you've created. Was revenge worth becoming exactly what everyone always suspected you were? Get out, Stephen said, his dominance flooding the chamber with pressure that made Vivian stumble backward despite her stronger bloodline. You're not welcome here. You're not welcome anywhere near my mate. If I see you again, if you approach Rosalie again, I'll demonstrate exactly what happens to wolves who threaten what's mine. Understand? You contributed to her suffering. You deliberately hurt her by sleeping with Bolden. That makes you a target for retaliation. I haven't decided whether to pursue yet. Don't give me additional reasons to choose violence over mercy. Vivian fled, actually fled, her bravado collapsing under Stephen's threat in ways that would have been satisfying if I wasn't so exhausted from the council session, from the public confrontation, from processing everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She's right, though, I said quietly once Vivian was gone. Everyone does think I'm opportunistic. Everyone does believe I seduced you for positioning rather than accepting your claim, because I wanted revenge against Bolden. That's the reputation I have now. The Omega who sleeps with powerful alphas for status and protection. That's not who I am, but that's who everyone thinks I am. How do I live with that perception? How do I function in pack society when everyone's judging me based on assumptions about my motivations? You live with it by not caring what they think. By understanding that power matters more than popularity, that being protected matters more than being liked, that having Alpha who values you matters more than having pack society approve of you. Their opinions, their judgments, they're irrelevant to your actual well-being, your actual safety, your actual future. Let them think whatever makes them comfortable. You know the truth. I know the truth. That's That's sufficient for functioning despite pack society's gossip. That's very practical perspective from Alpha, who's never been subjected to pack society's judgment about sexual behavior. You're male, powerful, retired from official duties. No one questions your choices or your motivations. I'm Omega, who's now claimed by my former mate's father. Everyone questions everything about me. That's not equivalent situation. Don't pretend understanding judgment you've never experienced. You're right. I don't understand the specific judgment Omegas face for sexual choices that alphas make without consequence. But Rosalie, I understand being targeted, being threatened, being forced to defend choices that powerful people want to punish you for making. That's parallel experience even if the specifics differ. And what I learned through 40 years of being targeted, you don't survive by seeking approval. You survive by building alliances with people who value you, by accepting protection from those willing to defend you, by choosing power over popularity when circumstances force that choice. That's how you function despite judgment. Not by making everyone like you, by making the right people value you enough to defend you against those who don't. He was right, I realized. Not about the equivalence. His experience as powerful alpha male wasn't the same as my experience as Omega being judged for sexual choices. But about the strategy. About survival requiring value over approval, protection over popularity, strategic alliances over universal acceptance. Then teach me, I said. Teach me how to function as your claimed mate despite pack society's judgment. Teach me how to survive the retaliation that's coming from Bolden and Vivian and everyone who thinks I don't deserve the position I've claimed through accepting your mark. Teach me how to be more than just Omega who made desperate choice and is now suffering consequences. I want to be actually worthy of the protection you're offering. Not just accepted because you feel obligated to defend what you claimed. Actually worthy because I've become strong enough to stand beside you rather than just hiding behind you. That's ambitious goal for Omega, who was invisible 24 hours ago. But I appreciate the ambition. That suggests you're not content with passive protection, that you want to develop capability to defend yourself and contribute to your own security. That's mate behavior, Rosalie. That's thinking like partner rather than like possession requiring constant guarding. I'll teach you. Starting with understanding how to identify threats before they become attacks, how to navigate pack politics without making unnecessary enemies, how to project strength even when you're frightened. Those are survival skills for claimed Omegas in visible positions. And you're going to need all of them for what's coming. What is coming? Beyond Bolden's retaliation and Vivian's malice, what else should I be preparing for? Your father's reaction to the claim. Your stepmother's anger about your elevation above Vivian. The political maneuvering from alphas who want to use our conflict for their own advancement. And Stephen's expression darkened. And the truth about your mother. About why she died. About what she was involved in that got her killed and got you relegated to invisible bastard status despite being legitimate claim to your father's acknowledgement. That's coming too. The truth you've never been told, because keeping you ignorant kept you safe. Now that you're visible, now that you're claimed by me, that safety is gone. You're going to learn everything. And it's going to change how you understand your entire life up to this point. What truth about my mother? She died in car accident when I was 3. That's what my father always said. What actually happened? She was murdered. By Bolden's mother, specifically, as retaliation for information your mother provided to pack authorities about corruption in the Alpha bloodlines. Your mother was informant, Rosalie. She was trying to expose illegal activities that powerful families wanted buried. She was killed for that exposure attempt, and you were marked as bastard, as illegitimate, as disposable because acknowledging you properly would have drawn attention to what she'd been investigating. Keeping you invisible kept you alive. But now you're claimed by me, now you're visible, now you're connected to power structure your mother was trying to expose. The people who killed her are going to recognize you as threat. That's what's coming. Not just Bolden's retaliation. The resurrection of conflicts your mother died trying to resolve. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying, that my mother's death was an accident, that I'd been kept invisible for protection rather than just because I was unwanted, that accepting Stephen's claim had made me target for people who'd murdered my mother 20 years ago. Why didn't you tell me this before claiming me? Why let me accept your mark without knowing this would make me target for my mother's killers? Because you wouldn't have accepted the claim if you'd known. You'd have chosen invisible safety over visible revenge. And I needed you to choose the claim, needed you angry enough to accept it, needed circumstances aligned for exposing the corruption your mother died investigating. I used you, Rosalie. I used your rage for my own purposes, avenging a woman I couldn't protect 20 years ago by protecting her daughter now and finishing the exposure she started. That's truth about why I agreed to claim you so readily. Not just for revenge against my son, for justice for your mother that I failed to deliver when it mattered. You knew my mother, I said slowly, understanding dawning with sick certainty. She wasn't just informant. She was yours. Your mate or your lover or something that made her death personal for you beyond just political corruption. That's why you're so committed to protecting me, why you're willing to defy your own son, why you're determined to expose whoever killed her despite 20 years passing.
Because she mattered to you.
Because I'm hers. And protecting me is the closest you can come to protecting her retroactively. She was my fated mate, Stephen admitted, his carefully controlled expression finally cracking to show actual pain beneath. She was married to your father through political arrangement, but she was mine through moon goddess designation. We couldn't claim each other properly without causing pack civil war, couldn't acknowledge the bond without destroying political stability. So we stayed separate. She stayed with your father. I married Bolden's mother for alliance purposes. And we both suffered for duty over desire. Then she started investigating corruption, started collecting evidence against powerful alphas, including my wife, and she was killed before I could protect her. You're all I have left of her. Her daughter. The child she died protecting by keeping you invisible, keeping you safe, keeping you unknown to the people who wanted her dead. And I failed to protect her. But I won't fail to protect you. Even if that protection requires exposing truths that should have been revealed 20 years ago. The revelation was too much. Learning my mother was murdered, learning she was Stephen's fated mate, learning I'd been kept invisible to protect me from her killers, learning that accepting Stephen's claim had been his plan all along to resurrect investigation she died attempting. So, I'm not really your mate, I said, my voice hollow. I'm just substitute for the woman you actually wanted. The daughter of your fated mate who you're protecting because you failed to protect her. That's what this claiming actually is. Obligation to her memory, not value of me as individual. I'm just echo of someone else. Just way for you to feel less guilty about failing to save her 20 years ago. No, Stephen said fiercely, pulling me against him with desperation I'd never heard in his voice before. No, you're not substitute. You're not echo. You're not just obligation to her memory. You're yours. Rosalie Forgathy, who walked into my estate demanding revenge despite terror, who accepted my claim despite consequences, who's braver than she realizes and more valuable than she believes. Yes, claiming you served my purposes regarding your mother's investigation. Yes, protecting you is partly about duty to her memory. But keeping you, wanting you permanently, that's about you. About who you actually are, not who you remind me of. Don't reduce yourself to just echo of someone else. You're more than that. You're mine because I choose you, not because I'm settling for substitute. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his claim was about me rather than just about his guilt over my mother. But how could I trust anything he said when he deliberately manipulated me into accepting the claim, when he'd hidden truths that would have changed my decision, when protecting me served his purposes for revenge that had nothing to do with actual value of me as individual? I need time, I said, pulling away from him despite his protest. I need to process everything. The claiming, the council session, Vivian's threats, the truth about my mother, your manipulation of circumstances to serve your own revenge purposes. That's too much for 24 hours. I can't just accept it all without processing what it means for who I am and what I've actually chosen by accepting your claim. Take time.
Take space.
But Rosalie, don't leave the estate. Don't make yourself vulnerable by going somewhere I can't protect you. The threats are real. Your mother's killers are real. Bolden's retaliation is coming. Stay where I can defend you while you're processing. That's a compromise between giving you space and maintaining the security you need whether you trust me or not. I agreed because I had no better options. Nowhere else to go, no one else to protect me, no resources to defend myself against threats that were multiplying faster than I could track. I was trapped. Not by the claiming, by the circumstances claiming had created, by the visibility that made me target, by the connections to my mother's murder that I'd never known existed until accepting Stephen's claim had resurrected them. This was revenge. But not the simple hurt for hurt I'd imagined. This was complicated, multi-layered revenge that served purposes I didn't fully understand, that protected me while using me, that valued me while manipulating me. This was what Stephen had warned me about. Revenge costing more than I thought I could afford to pay, stripping away who I'd been, leaving someone I didn't recognize. I just hadn't understood how literal that warning would prove to be. How completely accepting his claim would transform my entire understanding of my life. My mother, my invisibility, myself. Now I understand. Now I knew the cost. The question was whether the revenge, whether the protection, the value, the visibility, was worth what I'd paid to achieve it.
I didn't know yet.
Couldn't know until I'd processed everything, until I'd decided whether being Stephen's claimed mate was freedom or just a different prison, until I'd determined whether his protection was gift or just an obligation to my dead mother that I happened to benefit from incidentally. But I'd find out, one way or another. I'd find out exactly what I'd bought with my rage-fueled decision to accept a retired Alpha King's claim. And then I'd decide whether I'd made the right choice. Or whether I destroyed myself as thoroughly as I destroyed Bolden's pride. 3 days after the council session, after processing revelations about my mother and Stephen's manipulation and the reality that I was the target for killers who'd murdered her 20 years ago, I received a message that my father wanted to see me. Not at his home, at a neutral location downtown. Fancy restaurant where pack business was conducted semi-publicly, where conversations could be had without fear of complete privacy being used for violence. Don't go, Stephen said immediately when I showed him the message. This is trap. Your father has never cared about maintaining a relationship with you. He kept you at arm's length your entire life to protect you from attention your mother's killers might pay if you were acknowledged properly. Him suddenly wanting to meet now that you're claimed by me? That's not paternal concern. That's political maneuvering or worse. Don't go. He's my father, I protested, despite knowing Stephen was probably right about suspicious timing. Whatever his motivations, he raised me, he provided for me even if minimally. He's one of only a handful of people who knew my mother. I need to hear what he wants to say, need to understand why he kept me invisible all these years. Need to know if he actually cared about protecting me or if I was just an inconvenient reminder of women he couldn't keep safe. Then I'm coming with you. You don't meet him alone. You don't make yourself vulnerable to whatever he's planning or whoever might be using him to get to you. We go together or you don't go at all. Those are your options. I should have argued. Should have insisted on autonomy. On having conversations with my father without Stephen's presence, on maintaining some independence despite the claiming. But I was scared. Scared of what my father might say, scared of who might be waiting at that restaurant, scared that Stephen was right about this being trap rather than genuine paternal concern. Together, I agreed. We go together. But Stephen, let me talk to him first. Let me have the conversation without you dominating it with your presence and your protectiveness. Just be there for safety, not to control the interaction.
Can you do that?
I can try. But if I sense threat, if anything suggests this is more than just awkward family conversation, I'm intervening regardless of your preference for autonomy. Your safety matters more than your desire for an independent relationship with a father who's never prioritized you before. Understand? I understand. Now, let's go before I lose my nerve completely. The restaurant was exactly as expected, elegant, expensive, full of pack members conducting business over food and wine, neutral territory where violence was discouraged by collective social pressure rather than legal restrictions. My father was already seated, looking older than I remembered, tired in ways that suggested stress beyond just normal aging. "Rosalie," he said when I approached Stephen behind me. "And Alpha Stephen. I wasn't expecting. I asked to meet with my daughter privately. Your daughter is my claimed mate. Where she goes, I go. Especially to meetings with family members who've spent 23 years keeping her at distance for reasons she's only just learning. So I'm here."
I'm staying.
Adapt to that reality or we leave, and you lose opportunity to say whatever you've planned. Stephen's voice was polite but absolute. He wasn't requesting permission. He was stating facts. My father sighed, apparently recognizing he had no leverage to demand privacy.
Seat.
"Both of you. This isn't a trap, despite what you're thinking. This is just father trying to explain choices he made 20 years ago, trying to help daughter understand why invisibility was protection rather than rejection." We sat, Stephen positioning himself so he could see the entire restaurant while remaining close enough to intervene if threat materialized. I focused on my father, trying to see past the careful distance he'd always maintained to the person beneath.
Why?
I asked simply. Why keep me invisible? Why treat me like a shameful secret rather than just explaining you were protecting me from my mother's killers? Why let me spend 23 years thinking I was disposable when apparently I was just hidden for safety? Because explaining would have made you target, my father said, his exhaustion obvious. Would have made you ask questions, investigate circumstances of your mother's death, draw attention from people who were perfectly content to leave you alive as long as you remained unknown. Your mother died protecting evidence against corrupt alphas, evidence I've kept hidden for 20 years because releasing it would make you target for everyone she'd gathered information about. Keeping you invisible, keeping you seemingly unimportant. That kept you alive. I didn't keep you at distance because I didn't care. I kept you at distance because I cared enough to prioritize your survival over your emotional well-being. That's why you never defended me against your wife's family. Why you let Vivian treat me terribly. Why you provided minimal support while keeping me separate from legitimate family business. You were deliberately maintaining appearance that I didn't matter, that acknowledging me was obligation rather than value. All to protect me from attention that would come from treating me like actual daughter. Exactly. And it worked. You survived to adulthood without being targeted by people who killed your mother. But now, he looked at Stephen with expression mixing accusation and resignation. Now you've claimed her, made her visible, connected her to power structure that will draw exactly the attention I spent 20 years preventing. You've made her target Stephen. You've undone all the protection I built by keeping her invisible.
Why?
Why would you deliberately endanger her like that? Because invisible protection isn't protection, Stephen said coldly. It's just acceptable suffering. Rosalie spent 23 years thinking she was worthless, disposable, tolerated rather than valued. That's not life worth protecting. That's survival without thriving. I claimed her because she deserved better than the invisible existence you called protection. And yes, that makes her target. But targeted while valued and defended is better than safe while believing she's worthless. I won't apologize for giving her what you never did, acknowledgement that she matters beyond just being kept alive. You've given her death sentence dressed up as validation. Her mother's killers are already moving. I've heard through back channels that they know about your claim, that they're planning retaliation against you through targeting her. She'll be dead within weeks unless you find a way to protect her that doesn't rely on just your personal capabilities. And you can't protect her adequately because you don't know who actually killed her mother, don't know which powerful alphas are involved, don't know the full scope of corruption her mother was investigating. I do. I have the evidence. But releasing it makes Rosalie even more visible, even more targeted. We're trapped. Protecting her by hiding evidence means letting killers remain free. Exposing killers by releasing evidence means making her ultimate target for everyone involved in corruption. There's no good option here. Then we choose the option that brings justice, I said before Stephen could respond. We release the evidence. We expose whoever killed my mother. We force the truth into public awareness where it can't be buried again. And we deal with the consequences, the targeting, the threats, the increased danger, together. I'm not spending the rest of my life invisible just to avoid making powerful people uncomfortable. My mother died trying to expose corruption. The least I can do is finish what she started by ensuring her evidence actually accomplishes something beyond just getting her killed. You don't understand what you're saying, my father said desperately. You don't understand who's involved, what they're capable of, how thoroughly they'll destroy you to protect themselves. This isn't simple pack politics. This is corruption involving multiple alpha bloodlines, illegal territory acquisition, murder of anyone who threatens exposure. Your mother thought she could expose it safely. She was wrong. She died terribly, Rosalie. Tortured before being killed, made to suffer to send message to anyone else considering investigation. I can't watch you die the same way, even if it means keeping evidence hidden forever. Then give me the evidence, Stephen said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Give me what your mate died collecting, and I'll ensure it reaches proper authorities in ways that protect Rosalie while exposing the corruption. I have resources you don't, connections beyond Western territories, allies in positions to act on evidence without being vulnerable to local retaliation, methods of protection that don't rely on keeping targets invisible. Give me the evidence. Let me finish what my fated mate started. Let me honor her memory by ensuring her death accomplished something beyond just silencing her. Your fated mate, my father repeated bitterly. You were her fated mate while I was just a political husband she was bound to through arrangement. You loved her. Actually loved her in ways I could never access because bond magic chose you instead of me. And now you're claiming her daughter, our daughter, partly because she's an echo of a woman you couldn't claim properly 20 years ago. That's complicated motivation for protection you're offering. It's honest motivation, Stephen corrected. I loved your mate. She was mine through bond designation, even though she couldn't be mine through actual claiming. Yes, I'm protecting Rosalie partly, because she's hers. But I'm keeping Rosalie, claiming her permanently, defending her against threats, including your concerns. That's about her. About who she actually is beyond just being her mother's daughter. Don't reduce my claim to just substitute for lost fated mate. It's more complicated than that. Before my father could respond, before the conversation could continue into more painful territory about my mother and Stephen's relationship and what my claiming actually meant, the restaurant exploded into chaos. Not literal explosion, magical attack. Multiple alphas moving simultaneously with coordination that suggested careful planning, targeting Stephen with silver weapons that would neutralize his ability to shift while other attackers moved toward me with clear capture intent rather than killing intent. Trap, Stephen snarled, shifting despite a silver blade embedded in his shoulder, his wolf form massive and terrifying as he positioned himself between me and the closest attacker. You let her into trap. You brought her here to be captured. I didn't know, my father was saying, backing away from the violence. I swear I didn't know they'd use our meeting for ambush. I thought this was safe, neutral territory. But his protest was lost in the chaos of actual combat, Stephen fighting multiple trained warriors while trying to protect me simultaneously, other restaurant patrons evacuating or joining the fight depending on their allegiances. Me pressed against wall trying to use barely trained barrier magic. Stephen had been teaching me to defend against attackers who were quickly realizing I was easier target than retired Alpha King in full defensive rage. One attacker got through. Alpha male I didn't recognize, moving faster than I could track, grabbing me with strength that made resistance impossible, pulling me toward restaurant exit while Stephen was distracted by three warriors attacking simultaneously with coordinated tactics designed to keep him occupied. Got her, the attacker called to someone outside, bringing her to secondary location. He never finished the sentence. Stephen had disabled his current opponents with brutal efficiency that demonstrated exactly why retired Alpha Kings remained dangerous, and now he was on my attacker with fury that transcended normal pack combat into something more primal, more absolute. The attacker died. Quickly, but not painlessly, Stephen's message to anyone else considering targeting his claimed mate was clear. Touch her and die. Capture her and die badly. Threaten her and face Alpha, who's spent 40 years perfecting methods of destroying opponents who threaten what he values. We're leaving, Stephen said, blood covering his muzzle, silver blades still embedded in his shoulder apparently not bothering him through sheer force of will.
Now.
Before more attackers arrive, or before someone decides a restaurant full of witnesses is problem requiring elimination. I followed, too shocked to argue. My father's protests fading behind us as we left through service exit, as Stephen shifted back to human form despite the obvious pain, as we made it to his vehicle, and he was driving despite injury that should have incapacitated lesser alphas. That was assassination attempt, I said once we were safely back at his estate, once estate security had confirmed no attackers had followed. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to capture me. To use me as leverage against you, or to torture me for information about evidence my father has, or to finish what they started with my mother by eliminating her daughter before I could expose them. All of the above, probably, Stephen agreed, finally letting healers address the silver blade wound that was preventing his supernatural healing from functioning properly. Multiple motivations, coordinated attack. Your father used as bait whether he knew it or not. They're escalating faster than I anticipated. That means we're out of time for slow investigation. We need your father's evidence immediately. We need to expose everyone involved before they eliminate all witnesses and bury the corruption permanently. And we need you somewhere more secure than just my estate. Somewhere they can't reach you even with coordinated assault teams.
Where?
Where's more secure than retired Alpha King's private estate with professional security? Territory outside Western jurisdiction. Somewhere my allies control completely, where Western Alphas have no authority or access. That's temporary relocation until immediate threats are neutralized and evidence is released. You'll hate it. Isolation, separation from university, complete dependence on people you don't know for protection you can't verify. But it's necessary until your mother's killers are exposed and prosecuted properly. You want me to go into hiding? To abandon the visibility and the validation I gained by accepting your claim? To return to being invisible, just different kind of invisible in different location for different reasons? That's exactly what I didn't want. That's trading one form of invisible protection for another. It's temporary invisibility for permanent safety. Once evidence is released, once killers are prosecuted, once corruption is exposed publicly, you can return to visibility without being target. That's end goal. Short-term hiding for long-term ability to live openly without constant assassination attempts. I know it's not ideal. I know it feels like betraying everything claimed. But Rosalie, his voice was raw with something that might have been actual fear. I can't protect you adequately while you're in Western territories where enemies have home advantage. I need you somewhere I can defend you absolutely until threats are eliminated permanently. Please, accept temporary relocation. Let me protect you properly instead of just barely defending against attacks I can't fully anticipate. I should have refused. Should have insisted on maintaining visibility despite danger, on not running from threats my mother had died facing, on being partner who fought beside him rather than asset he shipped away for safekeeping. But I'd felt that attacker's hands on me. Felt how close I'd come to being captured, tortured, killed like my mother. felt how inadequate my barely trained defensive capabilities were against coordinated assault from motivated opponents. Temporary, I said, my voice hollow. I'll go into hiding temporarily. But Stephen, I want promise. Promise that this is genuinely temporary, that you'll bring me back once evidence is released and threats are neutralized, that I'm not just being disappeared the way my father disappeared me for 20 years. Promise me this is protection rather than permanent exile disguised as concern for my safety. I promise. On your mother's memory, on my claim on you, on everything I value, I promise this is temporary. You'll come back once it's safe. You'll have the visible life you earned by accepting my claim. You'll be mine, publicly and permanently, without constant fear of assassination undermining everything we're building. That's promise I'm making. Believe it or don't, but know that I mean it absolutely. I chose to believe him because I had no better option, because the alternative was staying and dying like my mother, because temporary invisible protection was better than permanent death. But as Stephen made arrangements for my relocation to Allied territory, as I packed belongings I'd barely had time to accumulate at his estate, as I prepared to disappear from Western territories where I'd finally become visible, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. That accepting his claim had started a chain of consequences I couldn't control, couldn't predict, couldn't escape even by running to supposedly safe locations outside Western jurisdiction. That revenge had cost more than I'd anticipated. More than visibility. More than just simple hurt-for-hurt exchange with Bolden. It had cost my mother's life 20 years ago. And now it might cost mine if Stephen couldn't protect me adequately, couldn't expose corruption fast enough, couldn't neutralize threats before they found me in whatever Allied territory he was sending me to. This was the price of revenge. This was the cost of being seen. This was what Stephen had warned me about, transformation that stripped away who I'd been and left someone I didn't recognize. I just hadn't understood that sometimes transformation looked like death before it looked like rebirth. Sometimes you had to disappear completely before you could return as someone worth being. Sometimes revenge required losing everything temporarily to gain anything permanently. I was learning that lesson the hard way. Through assassination attempts and mandatory relocation and separation from the alpha who'd claimed me. Through invisible protection that felt suspiciously like the invisible suffering I'd thought I was escaping. Through discovering that sometimes the cage and the sanctuary look exactly the same until you try to leave and find out which one you've actually been living in. I just hoped, desperately, against all evidence, that this was sanctuary. That Stephen's protection was genuine rather than just another form of control. That temporary disappearance would lead to permanent visibility rather than just replacing one form of invisible suffering with another. I hoped. Because hope was all I had left when everything else had been stripped away by consequences of revenge I'd chosen voluntarily. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this time accepting protection wouldn't cost me everything. Rosalie's father used her AS bait for an assassination attempt. Stephen fought off multiple attackers with a silver blade in his shoulder. They were trying to capture Rosalie to torture her like they tortured her mother. Now Stephen is sending her into hiding in Allied territory while he releases the evidence that got her mother killed. Can he really protect her from assassins who've had 20 years to consolidate power? Will Rosalie trust that this is temporary protection and not permanent exile? And what's Bolden doing while his father is busy fighting his son's enemies and protecting the Omega he claimed? Hit subscribe because Chapter 5 reveals what happens when Bolden realizes Rosalie is vulnerable and decides to kidnap her himself before Stephen's enemies can. Also, going into witness protection because your dead mom was an informant. Exactly like every crime drama except with more werewolves. The Allied territory was exactly as Stephen had promised. Isolated, secure, completely outside Western jurisdiction where my mother's killers had no official authority or easy access. It was also lonely in ways I hadn't anticipated, separated from everything familiar, surrounded by wolves I didn't know who were protecting me out of loyalty to Stephen rather than any personal connection to me. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of waiting for news about evidence release, about arrests, about threats being neutralized. 2 weeks of Stephen's daily calls assuring me the process was moving forward, that prosecutions were being prepared, that I'd be able to return soon to visibility and the life we'd been building before assassination attempts forced relocation. 2 weeks of slowly going insane from isolation, disguised as protection. Then Bolden appeared. Not at the secure house where I was staying. That would have required getting past multiple layers of security and allied territory wolves who were specifically preventing unauthorized access. But at the small market where I was allowed to shop with escort, one of the few concessions to normalcy in otherwise completely restricted existence. "Rosalie," he said, approaching before my escort could intercept. Don't run. Don't call for help. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you choice my father never gave you. Chance to escape his possession and return to Western territories on your own terms rather than as his claimed mate hiding from threats he created by exposing you." "Stay back," I said, my hand instinctively going to the emergency beacon Stephen had given me. One press and allied territory security would converge on my location within minutes. "Whatever you're offering, I'm not interested." I chose Stephen's claim. I chose the protection and the visibility and everything that came with being his mate. You don't get to show up here offering alternatives after everything you did to create this situation. "I'm offering you freedom," Bolden insisted, his voice carrying desperate sincerity that might have been convincing if I didn't know him better. "Freedom from my father's manipulation, from being used to resurrect investigation that got your mother killed, from being target for enemies you didn't create.
Come with me.
Come back to Western territories where you'll be under my protection instead of his possession. I'll mark you properly, make you my queen like I should have done 2 years ago, give you the position and the power you deserve without the constant assassination attempts that come with being my father's mate. You're insane if you think I'd ever accept your mark after you chose Vivian, after you betrayed me deliberately, after you used our relationship for political convenience while treating me as a disposable placeholder. I'd rather face 100 assassination attempts as Stephen's mate than accept being your queen as a consolation prize after your first choice didn't work out. Vivian was mistake. Political calculation that I regret making. You were always the one I should have chosen, should have valued, should have marked before my father could claim you. I'm trying to fix that mistake. Trying to offer you the future we should have had before everything went wrong. Please, Rosalie.
Come with me.
Let me prove I can protect you better than my father can, that I can value you properly instead of just using you for revenge against corruption my mother was involved in. His mention of his mother's involvement in corruption, his apparent knowledge of evidence my father had been hiding, sent cold dread through me. This wasn't random appearance. This was coordinated, planned, timed for a moment when I was most isolated and most vulnerable to offers that seemed better than current circumstances. Your mother killed mine, I said slowly, understanding crystallizing with horrifying clarity. She killed my mother to protect corruption she was involved in. That's why you're here, not to offer me freedom, but to prevent evidence from being released. You're trying to capture me before your mother and her co-conspirators are exposed. This isn't about protecting me or offering me choices. This is about using me as leverage to stop Stephen from prosecuting everyone involved in my mother's murder. Smart Omega, Bolden said, his false sincerity dropping to reveal calculation underneath. Smarter than my father gave you credit for. Yes, my mother was involved. Yes, the evidence your father has been hiding implicates her and dozen other powerful alphas in corruption, including your mother's murder. And yes, I'm here to prevent that evidence from destroying my family's legacy and my political position. Come quietly or come by force, either way, you're coming with me. My choice is whether this is negotiation or kidnapping. Choose wisely. I pressed the emergency beacon. Pressed it and held it and prayed Allied territory security would arrive before Bolden could extract me from the market where too many innocent bystanders would be harmed if this turned into actual combat. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not being used as leverage against Stephen. I'm not. Bolden moved faster than I could track. Alpha King speed and strength applied to capturing Omega, who dared to refuse him twice now. He had me subdued before my escort could react, before Allied territory security could arrive, before I could use any of the defensive techniques Stephen had been teaching me. "Sorry, Rosalie," he said, not sounding sorry at all, as he carried me toward vehicle waiting outside market. "This isn't personal. This is political necessity. My family's survival requires preventing that evidence release. Your cooperation, voluntary or forced, is price of that survival. Blame my father for creating this situation. Blame your mother for investigating things that should have stayed buried. Don't blame me for doing what's necessary to protect my interests." The Allied territory security arrived just as Bolden was loading me into the vehicle, too late to prevent capture, but fast enough to engage his extraction team in combat that would buy time for reinforcements. I could hear fighting, could hear wolves shifting and attackers being disabled, could hear someone calling Stephen to report that his mate had been taken despite all precautions. Then we were moving, driving fast through territory that became increasingly unfamiliar, heading back toward Western jurisdiction where Bolden had authority and Stephen didn't, where I'd be completely under Bolden's control with no allies and no protection except whatever he chose to provide. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite terror, making it difficult to breathe properly. "Secure location where my father can't easily reach you. Where we can negotiate terms for your release, evidence destruction in exchange for your safety, something like that. Your leverage, Rosalie. The one thing my father values enough to trade prosecution for. That's what you've become by accepting his claim. Not a partner, not a valued mate, just a tactical asset he'll sacrifice his revenge to protect. Watch how quickly he abandons justice for your mother when faced with choice between exposing corruption and ensuring your survival. That'll teach you exactly how much he actually values you versus how much you're just a useful tool for purposes that have nothing to do with your worth as an individual. He won't abandon the evidence release. He'll find a way to rescue me and prosecute your mother and everyone else involved. That's what actual protection looks like. Not choosing between safety and justice. Finding ways to achieve both despite obstacles created by people who want to prevent accountability. You have touching faith in his capabilities. Let's see if it's justified or if it's just naive hope from Omega, who's desperate to believe she matters beyond just being a convenient weapon against corruption. Either way, you're mine now. Temporarily, until negotiations conclude. Try not to make this more difficult than necessary by attempting escape or resistance that will just result in restraints being necessary. I'd prefer to treat you as guest rather than prisoner. Your cooperation determines which category you fall into. I didn't cooperate. Didn't make this easy for him despite understanding that resistance might result in worse treatment. Because cooperating, accepting captivity quietly, that felt like betraying everything Stephen had given me, everything my mother had died for, everything accepting visible life instead of invisible suffering was supposed to represent. So I fought. Not physically. I wasn't strong enough for that to accomplish anything except giving Bolden excuse for restraints. But verbally, strategically, using every technique Stephen had taught me about psychological warfare and refusing to let captors define circumstances entirely on their own terms. "Your mother murdered mine," I said, making it a statement rather than a question. "Tortured her before killing her, made her suffer to send a message to anyone else investigating corruption. You knew about this. You've known for years, maybe your entire life. And you did nothing. Didn't pursue justice, didn't report her crimes, didn't even attempt to distance yourself from her corruption. You just benefited from it. Built your Alpha King position on foundation of murdered investigators and covered-up crimes. That makes you complicit, Bolden. That makes you guilty of everything she did through your willingness to protect her rather than pursuing accountability. How do you live with that? How do you rule back knowing your authority is built on corpses of people who tried to expose the truth?" "Easily," Bolden said, his voice carrying no shame or regret. "I live with it by understanding that power requires compromise, that protecting family requires accepting their flaws, that ruling effectively means prioritizing stability over individual justice. Your mother threatened that stability. She had to be eliminated. That's an unfortunate but necessary consequence of investigating things powerful people want buried. Don't make her into a martyr. She was a threat to pack stability who was neutralized through appropriate channels. That's all. She was person. She was my mother. She was Stephen's fated mate. She deserved justice, not murder disguised as necessary elimination of threats. You're exactly what corruption looks like, Bolden. Convincing yourself that maintaining power justifies any crime, that protecting guilty family members is more important than holding them accountable, that stability matters more than truth. That's how good people become complicit in terrible things. Through exactly the reasoning you're using right now. Save the moral philosophy for someone who cares about your opinion. Right now you're captive being transported to secure location for negotiation purposes. Your judgments about my moral reasoning are irrelevant to that reality. Stay quiet. Make this easier on yourself. Don't force me to treat you as a hostile prisoner rather than a negotiating asset I'm willing to handle carefully. I stayed quiet after that, not because he'd convinced me, but because I needed to conserve energy, needed to stay alert for rescue opportunities, needed to analyze the situation strategically rather than just reacting emotionally to captivity I hadn't anticipated. Stephen would come for me. I knew that with absolute certainty. He'd rescue me or die trying, because that's what his protection meant. That's what claiming me represented. That's what 40 years of Alpha King experience had taught him about defending what mattered. The question was whether he'd come fast enough, whether Bolden's secure location was actually as secure as he claimed, whether rescue would be possible before negotiations forced impossible choices. We arrived at the location after hours of driving, abandoned warehouse in territory that technically belonged to Western jurisdiction but was far enough from population centers that screaming wouldn't bring help, that combat wouldn't attract unwanted attention, that holding captive Omega for negotiation purposes could be done without immediate interference. "Welcome to your temporary accommodation," Bolden said with false cheer as he extracted me from vehicle. "Not luxurious, but secure. You'll be here until my father agrees to terms. Evidence destruction, dropping all charges against my mother and her associates. Public statement that your mother's investigation was baseless conspiracy theory that subsequent review has debunked. Once he agrees, once he chooses your safety over his revenge, you'll be released unharmed, and we can all move forward like this never happened. He won't agree to those terms. He'll rescue me instead of negotiating away justice for my mother. You're miscalculating by assuming I'm more valuable to him than exposing corruption. I'm not. I'm mate," he claimed, partially for strategic purposes, partially out of guilt about failing my mother, partially because I was a useful weapon against you. I'm not valuable enough to trade justice for. You've made mistake by kidnapping me thinking I'm leveraged that will actually work. Then you'll die here, Bolden said simply. If my father won't negotiate, if he prioritizes revenge over your survival, then you're a liability requiring elimination rather than leverage producing desired outcome.
Ide pra fe negociation.
But I'm prepared for alternatives if necessary. Don't convince yourself you're worthless just to justify his potential failure to protect you. You matter. Just maybe not enough to override his desire for justice. We'll find out together which motivation wins, his love for you or his love for your mother's memory. He locked me in makeshift cell, actual cell with bars and concrete floor and minimal amenities, nothing like the guest treatment he'd offered if I cooperated. Apparently my verbal resistance had been sufficient to reclassify me from guest to prisoner requiring actual containment. I waited. Hours passing with no sign of rescue, no indication that Stephen had even located me yet, no contact from outside except Bolden's periodic checks to verify I was still secured and not attempting escape. Then I heard it, combat outside the warehouse, sounds of wolves shifting and weapons being deployed and Bolden's extraction team attempting to defend against whatever force had arrived for rescue attempt. Stephen. It had to be Stephen. No one else would assault Bolden's position this aggressively, this quickly, with the kind of overwhelming force that suggested absolute commitment to retrieval regardless of cost. The warehouse door exploded inward, not picked or carefully opened but literally destroyed through application of Alpha King's strength that didn't have time for subtlety. And there was Stephen, covered in blood that was mostly not his wolf visible in his eyes despite maintaining human form, his fury at finding me caged making the air feel heavy with dominance that transcended normal pack authority. "Release her," he said to Bolden, who'd appeared with weapon drawn but apparently uncertain whether actually shooting his father was line he was willing to cross. "Release her now, or I demonstrate exactly what happens to wolves who cage my mate. This is only warning you're receiving. Choose wisely." "You're supposed to negotiate," Bolden said, his weapon wavering slightly. "You're supposed to choose her safety over justice, trade evidence destruction for her release, prove that you value her more than revenge. That's how this was supposed to work. Not you assaulting my position and threatening to kill your own son for tactical decision about leverage. You miscalculated. I don't negotiate with wolves who harm what's mine. I rescue or I destroy. Those are only options when someone's foolish enough to cage my claimed mate. Now, release her or discover which option I'm choosing today." "You'll kill me," Bolden said with a dawning realization. "You'll actually kill your own son for Omega you claimed partly to hurt me, partly out of guilt about her mother, partly for strategic purposes that have nothing to do with actual love. You'll sacrifice our relationship, sacrifice blood connection, sacrifice everything we've built over decades for her. For Rosalie. For Omega you've known for 3 weeks. I'll sacrifice you for touching her, for caging her, for using her as leverage in an attempt to protect your guilty mother from consequences she deserves. You had choices, Bolden. You chose corruption over justice, chose protecting guilty family over holding them accountable, chose kidnapping my mate over accepting that evidence release was inevitable. Those choices have consequences. This is yours, death or exile. Choose which you prefer, but understand that keeping position as Alpha King isn't an option anymore. You've forfeited that through criminal actions that disqualify you from authority. This is because I hurt her first, isn't it? Because I chose Vivian, because I betrayed Rosalie before you claimed her, because I created circumstances that drove her to you for revenge. This is you punishing me for mistreating Omega, who's now yours. That's what this is really about. Not her mother's murder. Not corruption investigation. Just you. Destroying your own son for daring to discard the woman you wanted for yourself. This is about you kidnapping my mate. About you caging her like an animal for negotiation leverage. About you prioritizing your mother's protection over my mate's safety. Everything else, your betrayal of her, your corruption, your inadequacy as Alpha King, that's background. This specific consequence is the result of specific choice you made today. To kidnap her, to cage her, to use her against me. That's what I'm responding to. Release her now or face death for that specific crime. Bolden released me, opened the cell, stepped back with weapon still raised but apparently unwilling to actually fire at his father despite all the threatening posture. I ran to Stephen, his arms closing around me with possessive relief that suggested Bolden might have been right about value overriding strategic considerations. You came, I said unnecessarily against his chest. You didn't negotiate. You didn't trade justice for my safety. You just rescued me. Like you promised. I don't negotiate with wolves who harm what's mine. I told you that. I meant it. Now, Stephen turned his attention back to Bolden, who was slowly lowering his weapon in apparent acceptance that he'd lost this confrontation. You have choice. Exile with your life intact. Or remaining as Alpha King and facing execution for kidnapping, for conspiracy to obstruct justice, for protecting guilty parties in murder investigation. Choose quickly. My patience for your existence is approaching limits. I choose exile, Bolden said, his voice hollow with defeat. I choose living in disgrace over dying for loyalty to my mother. That's apparently who I am. Coward who won't even defend family when consequences become personal. Congratulations, father. You've destroyed me thoroughly, politically, personally, every way that matters. Hope Rosalie was worth it. Hope she's worth sacrificing your relationship with your only son, worth 40 years of legacy building that you're undermining by prosecuting corruption your own wife was involved in. Hope when she realizes she's just a weapon you're using against me and a tool for avenging her mother. Hope she still seems worth all this destruction. She's worth more than you ever were, Stephen said coldly. More than your mother ever was. More than the corrupt system you've been perpetuating through protecting guilty parties. She's worth justice. Worth truth. Worth destroying everything built on foundation of murdered investigators and covered-up crimes. You're exiled, Bolden. Effective immediately. Cross Western Territories' borders and its execution order. Stay away from PAC, from politics, from any position of authority over others. That's mercy you don't deserve. Take it and disappear before I reconsider whether killing you serves justice better than letting you live in disgrace. Bolden left, not with dignity, but with a defeated slouch of alpha who'd lost everything through choices he'd convinced himself were justified. I watched him go, feeling a complicated mixture of satisfaction and sorrow at seeing him destroyed so completely by his own father. Did you mean it? I asked Stephen once we were alone. About me being worth more than 40 years of legacy, worth destroying your relationship with your only son, worth all the consequences that are coming from exposing corruption your wife was involved in? Or was that just thing you said to hurt him one final time before exile? I meant every word, Stephen said, his intensity making me believe him despite lingering doubts. You're worth justice. Worth truth. Worth breaking corrupt systems that sacrificed your mother and tried to sacrifice you. I'm not perfect. I claimed you partially for strategic reasons, partially out of guilt about failing your mother, partially because you were a useful weapon against my son's arrogance. But keeping you, defending you against assassination attempts and kidnapping and every threat that's emerged, that's about you. About who you actually are beyond strategic usefulness. You're worth protecting, worth valuing, worth choosing over corrupt son who kidnapped you for leverage. Don't doubt that just because the situation is complicated. I wanted to believe him completely. Wanted to trust that I was valued beyond just being strategic asset or guilt-driven obligation to my mother's memory. Wanted to feel certain that his protection was genuine rather than just well-executed performance for purposes I didn't fully understand. But I'd learned caution through kidnapping, through assassination attempts, through discovering that invisible protection had been keeping me safe my entire life. I'd learned that trusting completely was dangerous, that powerful alphas had complicated motivations, that being valued didn't mean being valued simply or purely. Take me home, I said, using his estate as a reference point for home since I'd lost any other place that qualified. Take me somewhere safe where I can process everything, the kidnapping, the rescue, Bolden's exile, your promise that I'm worth the destruction you're causing. I need time to understand what I actually am to you. Asset or mate. Strategic tool or valued partner. Obligation to my mother or choice about me. I need to know which one I actually am before I can decide whether I'm staying permanently or whether this claiming was a mistake I need to find way to undo despite bond magic, making that nearly impossible. You can't undo the claiming, Stephen said, something like pain flashing across his expression. The bond is permanent. You're mine. That's unchangeable reality, regardless of your feelings about how we got here. But Rosalie, I'll give you time. I'll give you space to process everything. I'll give you honest answers about my motivations and my value of you and everything you're questioning. You deserve that clarity. You deserve to know exactly what you are to me so you can make an informed decision about whether staying is choice you want to make or whether you're trapped by bond magic you accepted without fully understanding the implications. We left the warehouse, left Bolden's makeshift prison and the territory where he thought he could use me for leverage, and the evidence of just how thoroughly Stephen would destroy threats to what he claimed as his. And as we drove back toward his estate, toward temporary safety before next crisis emerged, I realized something important. I'd stopped being invisible. Completely, permanently, irrevocably stopped being Omega no one noticed or valued or considered worth protecting. I'd become visible. Target for assassination, leverage for negotiation, weapon in conflicts between powerful alphas who used people for strategic purposes. The question was whether visibility was actually better than invisibility had been. Whether being seen was worth being used. Whether being valued, even partially, even complicated, even mixed with strategic purposes, was worth all the danger that came with accepting powerful alpha's claim. I didn't know yet. Couldn't know until I'd had time to process, time to understand, time to decide whether Stephen's protection was genuine partnership or just a sophisticated cage disguised as sanctuary. But I'd find out. One way or another. I'd find out exactly what price I'd paid for revenge. And whether the visibility was worth the cost. Back at Stephen's estate, surrounded by security that had been massively upgraded after kidnapping demonstrated vulnerabilities in previous protection, I finally had space to breathe. To think. To process everything that had happened in the 3 weeks since I'd walked into this building demanding revenge against Bolden. 3 weeks. It felt like a lifetime. Betrayal and claiming and assassination attempts and kidnapping and rescue all compressed into period that should have been just ordinary weeks of university and normal life. But my life had never been normal. I was learning that now, understanding through revelations about my mother and her murder and the corruption she'd died investigating that invisible suffering wasn't normal, wasn't universal experience, wasn't just how illegitimate daughters lived. It was protection. Specific, deliberate protection from specific threats that my father had implemented to keep me alive. Protection that had ended the moment I'd accepted Stephen's claim. Your father delivered the evidence, Stephen said, joining me in private sitting room where I'd been staring at the fireplace for hours trying to process everything. All of it, documentation of corruption, testimony your mother collected before her death, physical evidence linking my wife and 11 other alphas to illegal territory acquisition, murder of investigators, decades of criminal activity disguised as PAC business. It's comprehensive, damning beyond any possibility of denial or political maneuvering. Prosecutors are reviewing it now. Arrests will begin within days. Your wife, I said, latching onto that detail. Bolden's mother. The woman who killed mine. What happens to her? She's dead. You said she died 5 years ago. How do you prosecute a dead criminal for a 20-year-old murder? You don't prosecute her. You expose her. You ensure everyone knows what she did, what corruption she enabled, what crimes she committed while serving as my Luna for 38 years. You destroy her legacy the same way she destroyed your mother's life. That's justice for dead criminals. Making sure history remembers them accurately rather than letting them be memorialized as something they weren't. Were you complicit? The question emerged before I could stop it, before I could consider whether I wanted to know the answer. Did you know what she was doing? Did you protect her the way Bolden protected her? Or were you ignorant of your own wife's criminal activities for 38 years? Because either answer is damning. Either you knew and did nothing, or you were so disconnected from your own mate that you never noticed she was murdering people who threatened her interests. I was complicit through ignorance, Stephen admitted, his voice heavy with shame I'd never heard from him before. I didn't know specifically what she was doing, but I suspected. I knew she was ambitious, knew she would defend her interests viciously, knew she had relationships with other alphas that suggested coordination beyond normal pack alliances. I didn't investigate. Didn't pursue suspicions. Didn't protect potential victims by exposing her before she could harm them. I was too focused on ruling, on maintaining stability, on political considerations that seemed more important than investigating my own mate. That's my crime. Not active participation. passive enabling through willful ignorance. So you failed my mother by not investigating your wife when you had reason to suspect she was dangerous. Then you failed her again by not being able to protect her when your wife decided she was threat requiring elimination. And now you're trying to compensate for those failures by protecting me, by exposing your wife's crimes posthumously, by destroying the corrupt system you enabled through your willful ignorance. That's what this claiming is really about. Atonement.
Guilt.
Attempt to fix past failures through present actions that are 20 years too late to save the woman you actually wanted to protect. Yes, Stevens said simply, not trying to deny or deflect. That's an accurate assessment of my motivations. I'm atoning for failures through protecting you. I'm processing guilt through exposing the corruption I enabled. I'm attempting to fix past mistakes through present actions that can't undo damage already done. That's honest explanation of why I agreed to claim you so readily, why I'm protecting you so absolutely, why I'm destroying my own son and my own legacy to ensure your safety. It's atonement.
Guilt.
Attempt at redemption that's selfish in its own way because it serves my emotional needs rather than just yours. At least you're honest about it, I said, my voice hollow. At least you're not pretending this is simple romance or a straightforward mate bond or anything except complicated mess of guilt and atonement and strategic purposes mixed together in ways that make actual love or genuine value difficult to distinguish from obligation. But it is love, Stevens said, moving closer despite my instinct to maintain distance. It started as guilt and strategy and atonement. But Rosalie, spending these 3 weeks with you, defending you, teaching you, seeing you become stronger and braver and more capable than you realized, that's created actual love. Genuine value. Appreciation of who you are beyond just being your mother's daughter or useful weapon against Bolden or opportunity for atonement. I love you. Actually, genuinely, in ways that transcend all the complicated motivations that brought us together. You're worth loving, worth protecting for your own sake rather than just out of guilt about your mother. Do you understand what I'm saying? Can you hear that and believe it's sincere despite all the complexity around how we got here? I don't know what I believe anymore, I admitted. I wanted revenge against Bolden. I got visibility and protection and complications I never anticipated. I wanted to matter to someone, to anyone, after years of being invisible. Now I matter for reasons I can't fully parse. Partly strategic, partly guilt-driven, partly actual value if you're being honest about developing genuine feelings. That's not the straightforward validation I was seeking when I walked into your estate demanding revenge. That's a complicated mess where I can't distinguish between being valued and being useful, between being loved and being an obligation you're fulfilling. Then let me simplify it, Stevens said, taking my hands despite my half-hearted attempt to pull away. The claiming started for complicated reasons. The keeping you is simple. I love you. I value you. I want you here permanently not because you're useful or because keeping you serves my atonement, but because you make my life better by being in it. That's simplest truth I can offer. Everything else is complicated. This one fact is simple. I love you. Choose to believe that or don't. But know that it's true regardless of your belief in its sincerity. Before I could respond, before I could decide whether I believed him or whether this was sophisticated manipulation by Alpha who'd spent 40 years learning how to say what people needed to hear, someone was pounding on the sitting room door with urgency that suggested crisis. Stephen, it was one of his security team leaders, bursting in without waiting for permission. We have problem. Your son, Bolden, he's not accepting exile quietly. He's gathered supporters, other alphas who are implicated in your wife's corruption, wolves who have more to lose from evidence release than they have to gain from following pack law. They're planning assault on the estate. Tonight, multiple coordinated teams attempting to eliminate Rosalie before arrests begin and testimony about their crimes becomes public. This isn't just Bolden's revenge anymore. This is criminal conspiracy attempting to silence witnesses before prosecution starts. How many? Stephen's voice was calm despite the implications. 20 trained warriors at minimum.
Possibly more.
They're well-armed, coordinated, motivated by survival instincts rather than just loyalty. This isn't pack politics. This is life-or-death assault by criminals who know they're facing decades in prison if evidence release proceeds. They're attempting to eliminate primary witness and destroy physical evidence before it reaches prosecutors. That's not something we can defend against with just estate security. We need to evacuate Rosalie, get her somewhere truly secure, somewhere 20 motivated assassins can't reach even with coordinated assault. No more evacuation, I said before Stephen could respond. No more running, no more hiding, no more being shipped to supposedly safe locations that turn out to be vulnerable to Bolden's extraction teams or corrupt Alpha's assassination attempts.
I'm staying.
I'm defending this position. I'm proving that victims don't have to run from criminals attempting to silence them. If 20 warriors want to assault this estate, let them come. Let them face not just you and your security but me. Omega they think is weak, invisible, easily eliminated. Let me show them that invisible Omegas who choose visibility are more dangerous than they anticipated. You're not trained for combat against 20 warriors. Then train me now. Fast training, emergency preparation, whatever crash course you can provide in the hours before they assault. I'm not running again. I'm not letting them force me into hiding again. I'm standing here, at your side, as your claimed mate, as my mother's daughter who won't be silenced the way she was silenced. This is my stand. My choice. Support it or don't, but this is what I'm doing. Stephen stared at me for a long moment, his expression mixing pride and terror and reluctant acceptance that I'd made decision he couldn't override without violating the autonomy he'd promised to respect. Then we defend together, he said finally. We prepare for assault. We coordinate with security. We ensure you have every possible advantage despite limited combat training. But Rosalie, if circumstances require your evacuation for survival, if defending this position becomes suicide rather than tactical stand, you leave. You let me evacuate you. You prioritize survival over symbolic victory. Promise me that compromise. Promise you'll run if running becomes necessary for staying alive. I promise, I said, though I wasn't certain I meant it. I'll run if survival requires it. But only after we've defended this position as long as tactically viable. Only after we've proven that victims fight back, that corruption doesn't silence witnesses easily, that my mother's death accomplished something beyond just getting her killed. I need this stand. Need to prove to myself and to everyone watching that accepting visibility was worth the cost, that being your claimed mate means something beyond just being used for strategic purposes. This is how I prove that. By defending rather than running. By standing rather than hiding. By being Omega who fights back instead of Omega who accepts mistreatment quietly. Then let's prepare you for combat you've never trained for against opponents who've spent years perfecting skills you're learning in hours. This is going to be difficult. Possibly fatal if circumstances go wrong. But if this is stand you need to make, I'll help you make it as successfully as possible given time constraints and training limitations. The next 6 hours were brutal, accelerated combat training that compressed weeks of learning into desperate crash course, Stephen teaching me how to defend against multiple opponents, how to use barriers strategically rather than just reactively, how to survive combat when you're outmatched in strength and experience through intelligence and tactical awareness. You won't win through strength, he said while demonstrating defensive positions. You win through making them underestimate you, through using their arrogance against them, through surviving long enough for me and security to disable enough threats that you're no longer overwhelmed. Your job isn't eliminating 20 warriors. Your job is not dying while those warriors are being eliminated by more capable combatants. Understand the difference. Survival, not victory. Defense, not offense. Stay alive long enough for actual warriors to handle the threats. Survive long enough for you to save me. That's the strategy. Very empowering. Survival is empowering when alternative is death, for symbolic reasons. I'm teaching you to stay alive, not to single-handedly defeat assault teams. That's realistic assessment of your capabilities after 3 weeks of minimal training. Don't overestimate your combat readiness just because you've decided to make stand instead of running. Overconfidence gets you killed. Realistic assessment of capabilities and limitations keeps you alive. Choose alive over symbolic. He was right, of course. I wasn't warrior. Wasn't trained combatant. Wasn't equipped to defend against 20 motivated assassins through personal combat skills. But I was determined.
Angry.
Committed to proving that victims could fight back, that my mother's death would be avenged, that accepting Stephen's claim had been right choice despite all the complications and dangers. That determination, that rage-fueled commitment to standing rather than running, would have to compensate for lack of training and experience. The assault came at midnight. 20 warriors as predicted, coordinated teams attempting to breach estate security from multiple directions simultaneously, well-armed and motivated by desperation that made them more dangerous than normal pack combat would create. They're coming for you specifically, Stephen said, positioning us in defensible room with multiple exits and clear sightlines. Most of the teams are diversions. Real threat is the 5-wolf unit heading directly for this position, trained assassins with specific target rather than general assault troops attempting to breach perimeter. Those 5 are the ones we need to survive. Everyone else is a security problem. Our problem is not dying to trained killers who know exactly where you are and exactly how to reach you despite defensive positioning. How do they know where I am? How did they? Traitor in security team. Has to be. No other explanation for their direct approach despite us changing defensive positions after kidnapping. Someone's feeding them information. Someone who, Stephen stopped, his attention focused on door that was beginning to show signs of forced entry. Someone who's about to regret that betrayal. Get behind me. Use barriers to protect yourself. Don't engage directly unless engagement becomes unavoidable. Survive, Rosalie. That's your only job. Survive while I'm handling immediate threats. The door exploded inward, and 5 wolves, 3 shifted, 2 maintaining human form with weapons, poured into the room with coordination that suggested extensive training and rehearsal. These weren't just pack warriors. These were professional killers, mercenaries, possibly wolves who specialized in exactly this kind of targeted assassination. Stephen met them with 40 years of Alpha King combat experience and absolute fury at threats to his mate. He was beautiful in his violence, efficient, brutal, leaving no openings for counterattack while systematically disabling opponents who'd expected retired Alpha King to be diminished by age. They'd miscalculated.
Badly.
But there were 5 of them and only one of him, and while he was handling 3 with terrifying efficiency, the other 2 were circling toward me with clear intent to capitalize on his distraction. "You're the target," one of them said, confirming what we'd suspected. "The witness they're paying us to eliminate. This isn't personal. This is business. Come quietly, and it's fast. Resist, and we make it hurt before you die. Your choice." "I choose resistance," I said, my barrier magic flaring with desperation-fueled strength I didn't know I possessed. "I choose making this difficult. I choose surviving long enough for Stephen to finish with her colleagues and demonstrate exactly what happens to mercenaries who accept contracts on his mate. That's my choice. Adapt to it or fail. Those are your options." They attacked simultaneously, coordinated assault designed to overwhelm my barely trained defenses through sheer force and experience advantage. I defended desperately, using every technique Stephen had taught me, relying more on luck and desperation than actual skill to stay alive while they were methodically breaking through my barriers. Then Stephen was there, having disabled his 3 opponents with speed that suggested he'd been holding back for some reason, now focusing on the 2 assassins attempting to kill me with clear intent to make their deaths educational for anyone else considering similar contracts. "You accepted payment to kill my mate," he said, his voice carrying deadly calm that was more terrifying than rage would have been. "That's contract you'll regret accepting. Not just because you're about to die. Because you're going to die slowly enough to understand exactly what mistake you made. The assassins died. Not quickly. Stephen had meant what he said about educational deaths, making sure anyone watching understood the consequences of threatening his claimed mate, making sure criminal alphas who'd hired them reconsidered whether eliminating me was worth the retaliation he was promising through visible demonstration of what happened to assassination teams. When it was over, when all 5 assassins were dead or dying and estate security was reporting that perimeter breaches had been repelled successfully, I was covered in blood that wasn't mine, shaking from adrenaline crash, barely believing I'd survived assault that should have killed me several times over. "You did well," Stephen said, pulling me close despite the blood covering both of us. "You survived. You defended yourself adequately until I could intervene. You proved that standing instead of running was a viable choice."
I'm proud.
Also terrified that you nearly died several times, but predominantly proud that you handled yourself competently under circumstances that would have broken less determined Omegas. "They were here to kill me," I said, stating the obvious because my brain couldn't process anything more complex yet. 5 professional assassins sent specifically to eliminate me before evidence reaches prosecutors. That's how desperate they are. How frightened of accountability. They hired mercenaries. They're willing to pay for my death rather than just accepting prosecution for crimes they actually committed. That's not normal pack politics. That's criminal conspiracy at scale I didn't understand despite all the warnings. That's what corruption looks like when threatened with exposure. That's why your mother died. She threatened them with accountability they'd spent decades avoiding. Now you're threatening them the same way by existing, by being witness to their crimes, by being my mate, and therefore protected well enough that they can't eliminate you easily. But they're trying. And they'll keep trying until either you're dead or they're arrested and prosecution removes their ability to contract further assassinations. When do arrests begin? When does evidence reach prosecutors and criminal alphas lose ability to contract hits on witnesses? Tomorrow morning. Prosecutors have expedited review given assassination attempts, have coordinated with federal authorities given scope of corruption. By noon tomorrow, 12 alphas including several council members are facing arrest for murder, conspiracy, illegal territory acquisition, decades of criminal activity. By evening, they'll be in custody where they can't authorize further attempts on your life. You just need to survive 12 more hours. One more night of defending against desperate criminals. Then it's done. Then you're safe from assassination attempts, free from constant security concerns, able to actually live visibly without nightly fears of professional killers breaking through defenses. Can you survive 12 more hours? Can you maintain defensive readiness through one more night before arrests provide safety that protection alone hasn't managed? "I can survive," I said, though exhaustion was making the promise feel uncertain. "I can offend for 12 more hours. I can make this stand until criminals are in custody and threats are neutralized." That's what my mother would have wanted. Surviving long enough to see her killers prosecuted. Ensuring her evidence accomplished something beyond just getting her killed. I can do that. I can survive for her. Then let's secure the estate, rotate security shifts, prepare for possibility of additional assault attempts before morning. This is final push. Last desperate hours before criminals lose ability to threaten you. Survive tonight. Tomorrow, everything changes. Tomorrow you're free from constant assassination attempts. Tomorrow you can start actually living as my mate instead of just surviving as target for hired killers. We secured the estate. We rotated security. We prepared for additional assaults that thankfully never materialized. Apparently 5 dead mercenaries and failed coordinated assault had convinced criminal alphas that eliminating me before arrests wasn't viable despite their desperate desire to silence witnesses. And when morning came, when federal agents arrived with arrest warrants, when 12 alphas were taken into custody, when evidence was officially entered into prosecution record where it couldn't be destroyed or buried, I felt something I hadn't felt since accepting Stephen's claim 3 weeks ago. Safe. Actually, genuinely safe rather than just temporarily protected between assassination attempts. The threats were neutralized. The criminals were in custody. The corruption was exposed publicly where pack politics couldn't bury it again. My mother's death had accomplished something. Her evidence had created accountability. Her investigation had resulted in justice, even though it had taken 20 years and multiple additional attempts on witnesses' lives to achieve. It's done, Stephen said, watching news coverage of arrests on screen that displayed booking photos of alphas who'd thought themselves untouchable. The evidence is public. The criminals are in custody. The corruption is exposed beyond any possibility of cover-up. Your mother's work is complete. Justice is finally being delivered. 20 years late, but delivered nonetheless. Does that make up for her death? Does successful prosecution balance the equation? Does justice achieved eventually equal justice delayed by murder of investigators? I was crying despite attempts to maintain composure, crying for mother I barely remembered, for Stephen's fated mate who died trying to expose truth, for all the years of invisible suffering that could have been avoided if corruption had been exposed 20 years earlier. Nothing makes up for her death, Stephen said honestly. Nothing balances the equation or makes murder acceptable because justice eventually prevailed. But Rosalie, it means she died for something. Means her investigation mattered. Means her evidence created accountability even though it took 2 decades to accomplish. That's not comfort. That's not adequate compensation for losing her. But it's something. It's purpose. It's meaning beyond just being silenced by powerful criminals.
She won.
Eventually, belatedly, posthumously, she won. The corruption she exposed is being prosecuted. The killers she identified are facing consequences. That's her legacy. That's what her death accomplished. And you helped finish it. By surviving, by accepting my claim despite danger, by standing instead of hiding. You completed her work. That's your inheritance from her.
Courage.
Determination. Willingness to be visible despite threats from powerful people who wanted you silent. I want to visit her grave, I said suddenly, knowing this was important despite not having visited since I was too young to understand death properly. I want to tell her we finished it. That her evidence created justice. That her daughter survived all the attempts to silence her the same way. That she's not forgotten, not dismissed as unfortunate casualty of pack politics. She's remembered as hero who exposed corruption even though it cost her life. I need to tell her that. At her grave. Where she can hear it somehow. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Stephen agreed. We'll go today. Together. We'll tell her what we've accomplished, what her evidence achieved, how her daughter survived to complete her investigation. That's honoring her memory properly. Not just prosecuting criminals, but acknowledging her sacrifice, thanking her for courage that made justice possible. She'd be proud of you. Proud of who you've become, how you've stood against threats she couldn't defend you from, how you've completed work she started. That's what I would tell her if she were alive to hear it. That her daughter is remarkable, brave, worth every sacrifice she made to protect her. We visited her grave that afternoon. Simple memorial in Pack Cemetery, marker that identified her as beloved mate, without mentioning her informant work or her investigation or the circumstances of her death. Just beloved mate. As if that was all she'd been, all that mattered about her life. That's inadequate, I said, staring at the marker. Beloved mate doesn't capture informant, investigator, hero who died exposing corruption. That's that erasure disguised as memorial. She deserves better. She deserves marker that acknowledges what she actually did, what she actually sacrificed, what her work actually accomplished.
Can we change it?
Update the memorial to reflect truth instead of just comfortable fiction that she was beloved mate who died in unfortunate accident. We can change it, Stephen confirmed. We can create a memorial that honors her actual life, her actual work, her actual sacrifice. That's part of justice too. Making sure history remembers her accurately. Making sure her courage is acknowledged publicly instead of being buried along with her body. What would you want the marker to say? What inscription would honor her properly? I thought for a long moment, considering words that would capture my mother's life, her work, her courage in ways beloved mate never could. Fierce investigator, I said finally. Faithful to truth. Hero who died exposing corruption so others could live free from criminals masquerading as pack leadership. Beloved by those who knew her worth. That's what it should say. That's who she actually was. Then, that's what it will say, Stephen promised. We'll commission a new marker, proper memorial, public acknowledgement of her work and her sacrifice. She'll be remembered accurately. That's the minimum we owe her for finishing her investigation, for honoring her courage, for ensuring her death created accountability rather than just silencing her. We stood there for a long time, me crying over mother I barely remembered, Stephen mourning fated mate he couldn't claim, both of us processing grief and justice and the complicated reality that prosecuting criminals didn't undo damage they'd caused or resurrect people they'd killed. But it was something. It was accountability. It was acknowledgement that my mother's work had mattered. And that was enough. Not healing, not closure, not adequate compensation for her death. But enough. Just barely enough to make visible life worth the cost of achieving it. Enough to justify accepting Stephen's claim despite all the complications. Enough to prove that standing instead of running had been right choice. Enough. 1 month after the arrests, after the immediate threats were neutralized and criminal alphas were securely in custody awaiting trial, Stephen called me to his study with expression that suggested serious conversation rather than routine update. Sit, he said, gesturing to chair across from his desk. We need to discuss future. Your future, specifically, now that immediate dangers are resolved and you're no longer a target for assassination. You have choices to make. Real choices, not just survival decisions forced by circumstances. I want to offer those choices without pressure, without obligation, without claiming bond, making you feel trapped by decisions you made when you were desperate. What choices? I asked, uncertain where this was going. Stay or leave, Stephen said simply. Stay as my mate, permanently, voluntarily, because you choose partnership rather than just accepting protection you needed during crisis. Or leave, break the claiming bond through ritual that's possible but difficult, return to life without me, pursue future that doesn't involve being retired Alpha King's mate. That's fundamental choice. Everything else flows from that decision. Do you want to stay with me? Or do you want freedom from claiming you accepted for complicated reasons, including revenge and protection and desperation? The question landed like physical blow. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't anticipated Stephen offering to release me from claiming I'd assumed was permanent regardless of my feelings about circumstances that created it. You'd let me go? I asked, my voice small. You'd perform ritual to break claiming bond, release me from being yours, let me leave despite everything, despite claiming me, defending me, sacrificing relationship with your son to protect me? You'd just let me walk away, if that's what I chose. Yes, Stephen said without hesitation. I'd let you go if that's what you genuinely wanted. Because keeping you through obligation isn't keeping you. It's just sophisticated imprisonment where bond magic prevents escape rather than actual bars. I don't want you trapped by decisions you made when you were desperate. I want you choosing to stay because partnership is what you want, not because you feel bound by claiming you accepted under duress. So, do you want to stay? Or do you want freedom to pursue life without me? I don't know, I admitted, the honesty painful. 1 month ago, I was invisible Omega grateful for scraps of attention. Now I'm retired Alpha King's mate, target for assassination attempts, daughter of murdered investigator whose work I helped complete. That's, that's extreme transformation. I don't know who I actually am anymore, what I actually want, whether I'm staying because I choose you, or because I don't know how to exist independently after a month of being completely dependent on your protection. How do I, how do I make this choice when I can't distinguish between genuine desire to stay and just not knowing how to leave? By taking time to figure it out, Stephen said. By returning to university, rebuilding social connections outside this estate, developing identity that doesn't revolve entirely around being my mate or your mother's daughter or victim of assassination attempts. By living independently while maintaining claiming bond, experiencing what life looks like when you're not constantly under threat or completely dependent on me for survival. That's how you figure out what you actually want. Through experiencing both realities, being my mate and being yourself independently, and determining which combination feels right versus which feels like obligation or habit or just not knowing alternatives exist. You're suggesting I return to university? Resume classes I haven't attended in months? Rebuild normal life while still being your claimed mate? That's complicated balance. How do I do both? How do I be a university student with independent life and claimed mate of powerful alpha simultaneously? Carefully, Stephen said with slight smile. By setting boundaries, by maintaining separate spaces for different aspects of your life, by not letting being my mate consume your entire identity. You're young, Rosalie. 23. You should be finishing education, building career, developing identity beyond just being someone's mate. I don't want our relationship preventing that development. I don't want you waking up at 30 realizing you never had chance to discover who you are independently because being mine consumed all the years when you should have been learning yourself. You're very insightful about relationship dynamics for Alpha, who spent 38 years in a political bond with a criminal who was murdering investigators. I learned from that failure, Stevens said seriously. Learning that preventing a partner from developing independently creates resentment, destroys relationships slowly through accumulated loss of self, results in both parties being trapped in dynamic neither actually chose freely. I won't repeat that mistake. I want you choosing to stay because partnership enhances your life, not because you feel trapped by claiming or by lack of alternatives or by not knowing who you are without me. That requires you actually developing independently, actually building life beyond this estate, actually discovering whether you want me as part of that life or whether you want freedom from complications that come with being a retired Alpha King's mate. What if I discover I don't want you? What if independence reveals that I prefer life without complications, without assassination attempts, without being daughter of a murdered investigator or mate of powerful Alpha? What if I choose freedom over partnership? Then I let you go, Stephen said, though pain was visible in his expression. Then I perform a ritual to break the claiming bond, release you from being mine, let you build life you actually want rather than life you accepted because circumstances forced your hand. That's what actual love requires. Prioritizing a partner's well-being over your own desire to keep them. I want you here. But I want you here choosing freely, not trapped by bond magic or by lack of alternatives or by believing you're obligated to stay because I protected you during month of crisis.
So go.
Return to university. Build independent life. Discover who you are beyond being mine. Then decide whether you want to stay or whether you want freedom. That's genuine choice I'm offering without pressure or obligation. I left for university the next week, returning to classes I'd missed, reconnecting with friends who thought I'd dropped out or transferred, rebuilding normal life that had been completely disrupted by accepting Stephen's claim. It was strange. Being a normal student again after months of assassination attempts and claims and dramatic rescues. Being just Rosalie who attended classes and studied for exams and went to ordinary social events where the most dramatic thing happening was relationship drama that didn't involve retired Alpha Kings or murdered mothers or criminal prosecutions. I liked it. Normalcy. The simplicity. The ability to be person beyond just being Stephen's mate or my mother's daughter or target for assassination. But I also missed him. Missed Stephen's presence. Missed the intensity of our relationship, missed feeling valued and protected and seen in ways I'd never experienced before accepting his claim. You seem different, my friend Elise observed during lunch between classes. More confident, more present, like you're actually here instead of just going through motions while being somewhere else mentally. What changed? You were so checked out last semester. Now you're engaged. What happened? I got claimed, I said, deciding honesty was easier than an elaborate cover story. By a retired Alpha King who defended me against assassination attempts and helped me complete my murdered mother's investigation of PAC corruption. It's been a complicated month. But it taught me that being invisible wasn't safety. It was just acceptable suffering. Being seen, being valued, being protected despite danger. That's better. That's worth whatever complications come with it. You got claimed by the retired Alpha King, Elise repeated slowly. You're serious. You're not making an elaborate metaphor about finding yourself or something. You actually got claimed by a former ruler who's protecting you from actual assassination attempts. Completely serious. My life has been insane for the past month, but also better than it was before. Because before I was invisible, disposable. Now I'm seen, valued, worth protecting. That's worth all the complications. Are you staying with him? Or are you here because you're leaving? Is this rebuilding independent life a step toward ending relationship? I don't know yet, I admitted. I'm here to figure that out. To discover whether I want him as part of my life or whether I want independence without complications. He's giving me space to make that choice freely without pressure. That's surprisingly mature for Alpha, who could just insist I stay because claiming bond makes leaving difficult. He sounds better than most Alphas I've met. Most of them would never offer to release mate bond just to let partner discover themselves. That's genuine respect for your autonomy. That's what makes choosing difficult, I said. If he were controlling, possessive, demanding that I stay, leaving would be an obvious choice. But he's not. He's offering freedom if that's what I want. That makes me actually have to decide what I want rather than just reacting against demands. And I don't know what I want yet. Don't know whether I'm staying because I choose him or because I don't know how to exist independently. 3 months passed. 3 months of university classes and normal social life and gradually rebuilding identity beyond just being Steven's mate or assassination target. 3 months of visiting him on weekends, maintaining a claiming bond while developing independently, learning who I actually was when I wasn't defined entirely by relationship or by being protected or by mother's legacy. And slowly, gradually, over those 3 months, I realized what I wanted. I wanted him. Not because I was trapped by claiming bond or because I didn't know alternatives, but because partnership with Steven enhanced my life rather than consuming it. Because being his mate while also being myself felt better than being either one exclusively. Because I loved him. Actually, genuinely. In ways that transcended complicated origins and strategic purposes and all the complex motivations that brought us together. I choose you, I said when I returned to his estate after completing the semester. I choose staying. I choose a partnership that includes being your mate while also being a university student and my mother's daughter and a person with independent identity. That's my genuine choice made freely after 3 months of developing separately.
I want you.
I want us. I want this relationship despite all the complications because being with you is better than being without you. That's what I've learned through having space to discover myself. That you're part of who I want to be. Steven's relief was palpable. He'd clearly been uncertain whether I'd choose to stay, whether 3 months of independence would convince me freedom was preferable to partnership. I love you, he said, pulling me close in an embrace that felt like homecoming. I love you for choosing to stay, for choosing me after actually experiencing alternatives, for being brave enough to make genuine choice rather than just accepting circumstances. That's gift I didn't expect to receive. Partner who chooses me freely. That's better than claiming a bond forced by crisis or maintained through obligation. This is real relationship. Chosen partnership. Mutual decision to build future together rather than just surviving present crises. Thank you for staying, for choosing this, for being willing to build something genuine from complicated beginnings. Thank you for letting me go long enough to discover I wanted to return, I said. For not keeping me trapped by claiming, for not demanding I stay through obligation, for giving me space to figure out what I actually wanted. That's what made choice possible. What made this real. If you'd insisted I stay, I might have stayed, but I would have resented it eventually. By letting me go, by trusting I'd come back if partnership was what I genuinely wanted, you made it possible for me to choose you freely. That's love. Real love. Not possession disguised as protection. Actual care about my well-being over your desire to keep me. I'm grateful for that. More grateful than I can express adequately. 2 years later, I stood at a podium in the university auditorium, preparing to defend my thesis on PAC governance reform and corruption prevention, research directly inspired by my mother's investigation, built on evidence she'd died collecting, dedicated to ensuring future investigators didn't face murder for exposing the truth. Stephen was in the audience, front row, supportive but not dominating, present without overshadowing my achievement. 2 years of partnership had taught us that balance, being together while maintaining separate identities, supporting without controlling, building relationship that enhanced both our lives rather than consuming either one. This thesis examined structural reforms necessary to prevent the kind of systemic corruption my mother died exposing. I began, my voice steady despite nerves. Reforms that create accountability, transparency, protection for whistleblowers who risk everything to expose the truth. Reforms that ensure PAC leadership serves PAC members rather than just enriching themselves through illegal activities disguised as governance. This work is dedicated to Helena Forgathy, investigator, hero, mother who believed truth mattered more than personal safety. May her sacrifice inspire better systems, better leadership, better accountability than the corruption she gave her life exposing. The defense went well. The committee praised my research, approved my conclusions, granted a degree that represented 2 years of work rebuilding life that assassination attempts had disrupted. I was university graduate now, employed by PAC Governance Reform Organization, building a career based on my mother's legacy while maintaining a partnership with Stephen that had evolved from claiming under duress into a genuine chosen relationship. Congratulations, Stephen said afterward, embracing me with pride that felt earned rather than obligatory. You've accomplished something remarkable, honoring your mother's memory through academic work that will influence actual policy, through building a career based on preventing corruption rather than just surviving its consequences. She'd be proud.
I'm proud.
This is who you were always meant to become. Not just my mate. Scholar, reformer, person carrying forward important work. That's your identity. That's your legacy beyond just being survivor of assassination attempts or the daughter of a murdered investigator. It's our legacy, I corrected. Mine and yours and my mother's. We built this together. You by protecting me long enough to finish education, me by choosing to stay and complete work instead of just surviving crises, my mother by starting investigation that made all this possible. That's what actual partnership creates. Combined legacy that's stronger than what any of us could build alone. I couldn't have done this without you. Without your protection, your support, your willingness to let me develop independently while maintaining a relationship.
Thank you.
For being a partner rather than just a protector. For treating me as equal rather than just asset requiring defense. For loving me in ways that enhanced my life rather than consuming it. Thank you for staying, Stephen said. for choosing partnership after experiencing alternatives, for building relationship with me while also building career and identity that don't revolve entirely around being my mate. That's better than I deserved after claiming you under complicated circumstances. Better than I expected when I offered revenge in exchange for claim. Better than I hoped when I realized I actually loved you beyond just strategic purposes or guilt about your mother. You've made me a better alpha, better partner, better person. That's your gift to me beyond just choosing to stay. We left the auditorium together, partners, mates, individuals who'd built genuine relationships from complicated origins through consistent effort and mutual respect and willingness to prioritize each other's well-being over our own desires for control or security. It wasn't perfect. We still had arguments about boundaries, about his protective instincts conflicting with my independence, about balancing his experience with my autonomy. But it was real, chosen, based on mutual decision to build future together rather than just accepting circumstances that had forced us together initially. What happens now? I asked as we drove back to a state that had become home rather than just a sanctuary. Now that I've graduated, now that career is starting, now that we're past crisis mode and into actual relationship building, what does our future look like when it's not defined by threats and assassination attempts and dramatic rescues? Normal, Stephen said with a slight smile. Boring, possibly. Relationship building through ordinary moments rather than just crisis bonding. That's what real partnerships look like long-term. Not constant drama. Just daily choice to stay, to work through conflicts, to build life together through accumulated small decisions rather than just dramatic gestures during emergencies. Think you can handle boring relationship building after 2 years of assassination attempts and criminal prosecutions? I'm looking forward to boring, I admitted. Looking forward to a relationship that's not defined by external threats, to partnership based on actual compatibility rather than just survival necessity, to building future through ordinary moments rather than just surviving present through dramatic rescues. That's what I chose when I came back after 3 months. Not dramatic claims and protection and intensity, just partnership. Real, boring, ordinary partnership with person I actually love. Then let's build that, Stephen said. Let's build a boring, ordinary, real relationship that's stronger than a dramatic origin story would suggest. That's my goal for our future. Not more drama. Not more crises. Just sustained partnership built through daily choices to stay, to work through conflicts, to prioritize each other despite inevitable frustrations. That's love. Real love. Not dramatic gestures. Consistent choice to build together. 5 years later, my mother's memorial stood in Pack Cemetery, proper marker now, acknowledging her work and her sacrifice rather than just identifying her as beloved mate. Fierce investigator. Faithful to truth. Hero who died exposing corruption so others could live free. Visitors came regularly, Pack members paying respects to investigator who'd made their governance cleaner, reformers acknowledging her sacrifice, students studying her case as example of whistleblower protection needs. She was remembered, accurately, respectfully, as hero rather than just unfortunate casualty. That was legacy worth dying for. Legacy I was honoring through my own work preventing future investigators from facing similar dangers. You did it, Stephen said, standing beside me at the memorial. You finished her work, honored her memory, built a career based on ensuring her sacrifice created lasting change. She'd be proud of who you've become.
I'm proud.
This is victory. Not dramatic. Not immediate. Sustained over 7 years of consistent effort to prevent corruption rather than just surviving its consequences. That's real change. That's the actual legacy. We did it, I corrected. Together. You and me and everyone who's worked on governance reform for past 7 years. That's what change actually requires. Not individual heroes. Sustained collective effort over years, over decades, by people committed to preventing corruption rather than just surviving it. My mother started it. We're continuing it. Future reformers will build on what we've established. That's legacy. That's how actual change happens. We stood there for a long moment, remembering Helena Forgathy, honoring her sacrifice, acknowledging that justice delayed but ultimately delivered was better than justice denied permanently. 7 years since I'd walked into Stephen's estate demanding revenge against Bolden. 7 years since I'd accepted claiming I'd thought would be simple hurt-for-hurt exchange. 7 years since I'd learned the difference between being invisible and being seen, between acceptable suffering and actual protection, between surviving and thriving. It hadn't been simple. Had been a complicated, dangerous, often terrifying journey from invisible Omega to visible partner to accomplished reformer. But it was worth it. Every assassination attempt, every crisis, every moment of uncertainty about whether staying with Stephen was the choice I wanted or just circumstance I was trapped by, all of it was worth the life I'd built on the other side. I was seen, valued, building a legacy that mattered beyond just surviving threats or accepting mistreatment quietly. That was what revenge had actually accomplished, not just hurting Bolden but transforming myself from invisible Omega into a person worth being. That was worth everything it had cost. Every complication, every danger, every moment of terror or uncertainty. Because being invisible might have been safer. But being seen was better. Being valued was worth the risk. Being a partner in a genuine relationship built through sustained choice rather than just crisis bonding, that was worth all the dramatic origins and complicated beginnings. I'd chosen well. 7 years ago, in a moment of rage-fueled desperation, I'd accepted claiming that transformed my entire life. And I'd choose it again. Every time. Without hesitation. Because some cages are actually sanctuaries. Some protection is actually freedom. Some complicated beginnings lead to beautiful endings. And sometimes, just sometimes, revenge leads to something better than simple hurt for hurt. It leads to transformation. To visibility. To life worth living rather than just survival worth accepting. That was my legacy. Built from my mother's sacrifice and Stephen's protection and my own choice to stay when I could have left. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Rosalie graduated with honors and built an entire career on preventing the corruption that killed her mother. She spent 7 years transforming from invisible Omega into accomplished reformer. Stephen supported her independence while maintaining their partnership. Her mother's memorial finally acknowledges her as hero instead of just beloved mate. From revenge-fueled claiming to genuine chosen partnership. From assassination target to governance reformer. From invisible suffering to visible legacy. That's character development complete. Hit that like button if you love stories about women who transform rage into purpose and build careers on honoring murdered mothers' legacies. Thanks for following Rosalie and Stephen's journey from dramatic claiming to boring but real partnership. Remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting your ex, it's building life so amazing he realizes exactly what he lost. Also, dedicating your thesis to your murdered mom. Emotional damage delivered academically.